Chapter 461. A Last Embrace. Are you jealous of your sister now? If you wanted me by your side, maybe you shouldn't have assigned me to hers in the first place. What she said was true. I was the one who had her follow Ada in the first place. But thinking about it now, having Carmen follow me everywhere, just like she now followed my sister, I found the idea downright amusing. Come to think of it, I suppose you fit better beside Ada now. Besides, plenty of women have barged into my life lately. There was no place for Carmen among them. It's been a long time, Fry, since those days when our biggest problem was dealing with that old fossil Leonidas. You haven't changed a bit since then. But you have. Carmen turned to look at me. She had lived for a long, long time. Long enough that a few years weren't nearly enough to change her. But for me, the past few years had changed everything. Whether for better or worse. There's no need to hold back anymore, boy. You've been suppressing yourself this whole time, haven't you? So she noticed. I lifted my palm and glanced at my body. I've spent so much time among monsters. I've forgotten how to live among humans. I had pushed my body to the peak of perfection. My mind, my reflexes, everything sharpened and refined. I had dedicated myself wholly to the art of war. And because of that, this body now craved it. Craved battle. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to release the pressure I had been bottling up inside. My hands tingled more and more with each passing day I didn't wield a blade, whether it was Balerion or the Dark Sister. For the first time in my life, I found myself yearning for it. Yearning for war. Let them know what fear truly means, Fry. Let them witness the rebirth of a star. The star of Abraham's starlight. Placing her hand gently atop my head, Carmen smiled one last time. But remember, don't lose yourself. I won't, I replied simply, savoring these brief moments with one of the few people I truly cared about in this life. Carmen felt the same. But at that moment, I didn't realize it yet, that my body had already begun its strange transformation, the change that would shape what I was to become. Without warning, a strange violet spark flickered from the point where Carmen's hand touched my head. A spark only she could see. But it was enough. Enough to trigger a sudden shift that shattered her smile and darkened her face. Carmen possessed deep experience and unshakable composure. She managed to hold herself together, despite what she had just seen. But that didn't stop a faint shadow of grief from surfacing on her face. A look I rarely saw from her. What's wrong? I asked. She responded immediately. Nothing. With a heavy sigh, Carmen regained control of her expression and slowly withdrew her hand. I guess I'm just tired. After chasing your sister around for months. Then take a break while I'm around, I offered, showing a bit of concern. But she gently refused. Don't underestimate me. I may be just an old lady, but I've still got plenty left to offer. Of course you do. We stood there, the snow falling gently over our heads, in the bustling port of Winterfell, sharing a quiet moment, until Ada finally arrived and joined us. Look at you, sister. Somehow, you remind me of myself. The fatigue on her face was unmistakable. She, too, had developed those dark circles under her eyes, a consequence of the constant pressure placed on her shoulders due to her high position in the army. It's still not enough, Ada muttered with a frown. I shook my head. No. You've already done more than enough. I cast a glance over the bustling war camp that had taken shape here, amid the frozen lands of the Moonlight family, over the ships that stretched across the horizon, and the vast preparations Ada had orchestrated on my behalf. Couldn't have asked for more. It's details like these that win wars. Be proud of yourself, Ada. You've proven yourself worthy of being the lord of this family. I meant it, and my sincerity brought a bittersweet smile to her face. Why are you suddenly acting like the older brother? It doesn't suit you. But despite her words, I could sense the quiet happiness blooming in her heart. She never was good at hiding her true feelings from me. Ada's gentle smile didn't last long. Her eyes drifted to the distant horizon, where the sun was nearing its descent. So, it's time. I nodded. Yes, the first Imperial campaign begins now. The ships set sail at dawn. I would be aboard, the one leading the charge from the front. Here we are again, saying goodbye. I nodded again. Yeah. It had happened so many times in recent years that we'd almost grown used to it. Ada knew better than to try stopping me anymore. No matter how hard she tried, her brother would always find his way back to the battlefield. That was the place I belonged to now. I won't ask for much, Fry. Stepping closer, Ada spoke firmly. All I ask is that you come back to me in one piece. As long as I was alive, as long as I returned to her in the end, Ada would never ask for more. And yet, once again, I found myself forced to make a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I promise. Ada would be fighting her own battle, commanding from the rear, while I would be thrown into the heart of the storm. In that moment, it hit me. Once I crossed the demonic sea, it would be a very long time before I saw her again. Without meaning to, I pulled my sister into a tight embrace. One final hug. Carmen watched silently from the side, smiling gently and allowing us to have our moment. After a few seconds, I let go, but Ada held on. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want me to leave, but I couldn't grant her that wish.
I'm sorry, Ada.
Pressing a kiss to her forehead, I took my first step away from her. I'll see you later. With those parting words, I left her behind, before the emotions between us could deepen further. See you later, Fry. Ada echoed those words in a soft whisper, fiddling with a strange device in her hands. There was a lot on her mind lately. Right now, she wasn't just Ada Starlight. She was the second in command of the Empire's Grand Army. And I was just a soldier, a simple fighter playing his part in the vanguard. But in the end, both of us were heading toward it. The War of Darkness. Chapter 462. Glory to the Empire 1. Fry Starlight's POV. As the snow continued to fall endlessly over the western edge of the Empire, Winterfell stood shrouded in white. One by one, the ships were prepared, battered constantly by the freezing sea waves. The Empire's fleet was moments away from launching its most decisive raid yet against the Ultras. Among all the ships, there was one that stood out. A black vessel bearing the banners of the major noble families and ruling powers of the human side. It was the ship leading the vanguard, and I was on board. Unlike the other ships, which were packed with soldiers, this one held only the members of our special squad. With the exception of the ship's captain, who handled the helm. That man was an old sailor with rough features and a missing eye, giving him the look of a pirate in my eyes. He spent most of his time chatting with Bloodmater, the two of them speaking endlessly about life, past wars, and stories they both lived through. The old man wasn't exactly normal. He could even be called insane. After all, only a madman would willingly board the vessel destined to be the very first to encounter the Ultras' retaliation. But when I really thought about it, maybe that old man was wiser than the rest. Given the sheer amount of power packed onto this ship, our odds of being completely wiped out were very, very low. Standing on the starboard side, I gazed out into the void, toward the frozen sea we were about to cross. It'll take us 2 full days to reach the Bay of Shezglar, the same place where the last battle took place. As I stared into the waves, a voice joined me. My friend and partner in crime, Ghost Umbra. He wore a full black outfit that resembled the assassins from games like Assassin's Creed, complete with a hood and lightweight gear that made movement easy. What I wore wasn't all that different, except mine was much heavier. Not much left then, I commented indifferently, standing shoulder to shoulder as we both stared out at the sea. Come to think of it, it was snowing hard that night too. Yeah. Red and white go well together, don't they? This pure snow is far too easy to dye red. Ghost said that with a strange calm. And we both remembered that night. The night we killed someone we once called a brother. Thinking back, I remembered something Ghost said that night. Something about consequences. About paying the price. that we had become sinners now, and would be punished for what we'd done sooner or later. Maybe the price will be paid soon. It will be. Ghost's reply confirmed we were thinking the same thing. We both smiled grimly, leaning against the railing of the ship. Just make sure we kill the bastards who caused all this before our turn comes. Let's make them pay. He voiced what was already obvious. He didn't even need to say it. Oh, don't worry. I'll make sure they do. I could barely restrain my killing intent in this moment. The blades inside me trembled. The Ultras, Gvardiel, and perhaps even Beatrice, since she was the one behind that cursed game, they'd all get their fair share. What are you two doing? Off on your own in a place like this? Wearing his gleaming armor, our third companion approached. It was Snow. Unlike you and your shining presence, we prefer the shadows. I was serious. We looked dull compared to him. Snow sighed in frustration, clearly feeling left out again. It's not like I chose to be in the spotlight. I know, but that doesn't change the fact that you're the star tonight, does it? No comment. Snow scratched his head, visibly annoyed by the responsibility that had been suddenly dumped on him. As the crowned hero and wielder of Vermithor, he'd been chosen to give the speech before the raid began. His words would be heard by the entire 10,000-strong fleet, as well as the entire force stationed at Winterfell's military harbor. I found the whole situation amusing, because with my face I was never going to be picked for that job anyway. What's with that look? All you have to do is go up there and say a few flowery words. That's it. Easier said than done. Snow continued grumbling, leaning on the railing beside us. He looked more nervous about giving that speech than about the war itself. Let me give you a little tip. It might help make your big moment better. Oh? I'm listening. Once he showed interest, I gave him my advice. It's simpler than you think. Humans are easy to lead. All you need is something flashy, like a bright explosion or fireworks right as you finish your speech. I was completely serious, but Snow didn't seem to believe me. And here I thought you were going to give me some real advice. I am serious, so you know. That just makes it worse. Even Ghost agreed. I don't think something like that would work. To him, it sounded just as ridiculous. Neither of you understand the art of presentation. There wasn't much I could say if they refused to believe me. We kept talking about it for a while longer, sharing moments that felt like echoes from the past, until silence finally settled between us. It's our first time again since Launder, isn't it? Snow brought it up, our old adventure. The time we traveled to another planet in search of the unknown. This time it wasn't a different world, but a different continent. Yeah, this time it'll be even harder. After all, this was war. Let's give it everything we've got, for those still alive ahead of us, and the dead we left behind. Snow clenched his fist, golden eyes glowing with determination. As for me and Ghost, our expressions darkened. We both fell silent. Snow was probably thinking about him. Danzo. A pang of guilt struck me. He was the only one we had left in the dark. The only one who didn't know what really happened. Snow was the very definition of a hero. Something far too bright when compared to someone like me, or an assassin like Ghost. He would have never agreed to what we did. He would never have killed Danzo. Not even in the final moment. Maybe he would have let him fully turn into a demon first, then fought him afterward. Because that's just the kind of person he was. That's why we had to keep him out of it. We both carried the weight of that choice, and neither of us dared to imagine how he'd react. If he ever found out that I was the one who killed Danzo, and no one else, I often wondered how he'd take it. Maybe he'd resent me. Maybe he'd hate me. I didn't know. What I did know was that my friendship with the Empire's shining hero was starting to buckle under the weight of secrets. And I didn't know what the future held for us. Chapter 463. Glory to the Empire, 2. As the crashing of waves blended with the noise of men and the creaking of wood, the three of us stood there in silence, lost in our own thoughts. Then, without any of us noticing, the moment arrived. Time to go embarrass yourself. Good luck. I gave Snow a light slap on the back. He waved us off, dragging his feet as he walked away. After long hours of preparation and final checks, the Empire's first fleet was finally ready. As the soldiers boarded their ships, those vessels became like massive beasts, ready to carve a path through the sea toward war. The hum of magical engines, the roar of soldiers. All of it blended together in a thunderous harmony that shook the sky above. But before the campaign could officially begin, a single young man climbed to the mast of one of the fleet's largest ships. From there, his golden eyes looked down on everything. Snow Lionheart. His white hair danced in the wind as he stood at the peak. Clearing his throat, he gathered all of his aura into his voice, amplifying it to reach every soul present. Then, without warning, the Empire's promised hero let out a commanding cry. Attention! His voice rippled like a shockwave, silencing everything around him. 10,000 soldiers raised their heads in unison, their eyes fixed on him. With all eyes locked in place, Snow found himself wondering what exactly he was supposed to say. The soldiers below were in all sorts of states. Nervous, uncertain, afraid. They were human just like him. In truth, they were ordinary people. Citizens of the Empire, not born warriors. And at the brink of war, the dominant feeling in their hearts was likely fear. Taking that into account, Snow decided not to bother crafting a carefully written speech. He would speak honestly instead. Soldiers of the Empire, thank you for gathering here today, and for answering the call. He scratched his head and sighed, trying to put his thoughts into words. Despite my young age, I've spent my whole life within the walls of this empire. I've read its long history, about the storms it's weathered for over 300 years. His voice, amplified by aura, echoed clearly across the entire fleet as he continued. Even after seeing and experiencing so much, there's one thing I've never fully understood. Why people feel loyalty to an empire. Why they love the land they were born in. Some are born with those feelings. Others love their homeland simply because it's where the people they care about live. But all of that is relative. At the end of the day, these are feelings. Feelings that can be manufactured by the leaders of this nation. Just as parents can shape an entire family through how they treat their children, those above us can shape the lives of the masses with their decisions. The moment Snow spoke those words, the silence deepened. It was a striking statement. One that shook the very air. The Empire's crowned hero had just implied that the soldiers who gathered here by their own will were, in truth, merely individuals led by those at the top. His words were both wrong and right. Throughout history, people had often been manipulated by figures like Aegon Valerian, even by what remained of the ruling family. Not long ago, Mikar had forced many into a hopeless battle against their will. But Snow didn't let those poisonous thoughts linger long. Summoning Vermithor, he unleashed his power, lighting up the entire port of Winterfell, making dawn arrive early on that frigid night. The holy light of his aura washed over the soldiers, warming their hearts, filling them with something they didn't realize they needed. Snow delivered a spectacle truly worthy of the chosen hero, and then shouted with all his might, "The words I spoke to you earlier, I said them because I completely disagree with them. Loyalty, faith, and love. These aren't things to be dictated by those above us, not even from a commander to a soldier, or from a father to a son. These are things that cannot be forced. They're born from within us, from our own free will. Each of us defines loyalty in our own way. For some, it's a strong friendship that drives them forward. For others, it's love that makes them fight for someone dear, or devotion to a kind master they chose to follow. We all have our own reasons to fight, reasons that come from our own choices, from the freedom we were blessed with. That's why we stand here today, to defend this land. Perhaps it's presumptuous of me to define it this way. Everyone sees these things differently. But what I do know is this. Everything I just mentioned shines brightest when the people of a nation are living in peace, when they are free. To protect that freedom we've known until now, we gather here today to launch a war against a merciless enemy. Victory isn't guaranteed. This war won't be easy. In this war, your loyalty will be tested, not just to the Empire, but to humanity itself. Still bathed in Vermithor's light, Snow continued, igniting every soldier's heart like a spark in a storm. You may be faced with impossible choices: to die beside your loved ones, or run away and hide. I speak to you now not as the Empire's promised hero, but simply as Snow Lionheart. My loyalty is real. It wasn't bought. It wasn't manufactured. I was born here. I lived my whole life here, through joy and pain alike. And now I will prove that loyalty, as the second hero, as the successor to Kazes Valerian. The leaders of this empire are far from perfect. Perhaps they've caused some of your greatest tragedies. But one thing is undeniable. Today we all stand on the same side. This land we live on belongs to all of us, no matter our differences. And we will not turn a blind eye to an enemy who seeks our death. I can't speak for the entire empire, but what I can say is this. I and every member of the vanguard will fight to our last breath for this land. We will defend the empire against all who dare to bring war upon it. As the radiant light engulfed him, Snow finished his speech. He had said far more than he'd originally planned. But in the end, he spoke from the heart. He gave everything he had, trying to reach the 10,000 souls standing below. First, silence. But then, after just a few seconds, the soldiers erupted, shouting one after another, their voices becoming one. Glory to the Empire! Glory to the Empire! Glory to the Empire! With a smile, Fry laughed softly as he watched the effect Snow Lionheart had on the army. All with just a few words. In the end, he had taken his advice and delivered a spectacular show using Vermithor. Looks like all that worrying was pointless. Snow, in the end. He too had been born to be a king. That destiny was always expected of him. And with his speech concluded, dawn had already arrived. In that moment, the ships surged forward. The soldiers roared in unison, and the vanguard fleet departed from Winterfell Harbor. Their destination, the continent of the Ultras. Chapter 464. The Abyss Unleashed 1. Fry Starlight's POV. Glory to the Empire. Those were the words Snow Lionheart made everyone repeat, until they became a chant. A battle cry that the Imperial Army kept echoing throughout the first day of our voyage across the sea. Our fleet consisted of just over 100 ships, carrying the full strength of 10,000 soldiers. Even in a place as terrifying as the demonic sea, a fleet like this was a force to be reckoned with. Thanks to the overwhelming power we carried, not a single nightmare creature dared approach us. Despite their mindless, beast-like nature, they possessed a survival instinct strong enough to keep them away. And so, the fleet advanced smoothly, slicing through the waves one after another. For the past few hours, as I sat atop the mast of our flagship, I could hear the laughter of soldiers below, as veterans shared war stories with younger recruits. Swordsmen sharpened their blades, spearmen inspected their weapons, and mages went over their incantations. Everyone was eager, ready to fight for their continent, and for humanity itself. Just a few hours remained until we reached the Bay of Sheskler, the place that, in all likelihood, would host the first clash. Everyone knew it. Even though our vanguard squad was expected to handle the major battles, the tension still weighed heavily on the hearts of the soldiers. That's why they were doing everything they could to keep themselves busy, trying to avoid being crushed by the pressure. Followers of the church quietly recited their prayers, asking their God to light the path ahead. Others spent time with friends. I even caught glimpses of couples sharing intimate moments aboard the ships as they sailed toward war. Scenes like that weren't uncommon. Many couples forged love and even marriage on the battlefield. They say that life and death moments have a way of pulling hearts closer together. And among the 10,000 troops in the fleet, the number of female warriors was far from small. How romantic, to fight beside the one you love. When Sansa commented on the scene before me, I realized I had completely forgotten she was even there. Up here, at the top of the mast where the wind howled the loudest, Sansa had been asleep until now, her head resting on my lap, leaving herself completely vulnerable in my hands. She only opened her eyes the moment mine landed on the couples embracing their passion for love before battle. Sometimes I wondered if she did these things on purpose. Do you really think fighting beside the one you love is romantic? Of course, she answered, clasping her hands over her chest, those devilish eyes of hers gazing up at me from below. When you find yourself in the middle of a battlefield with the one you love, willing to throw your life away for them if necessary, isn't that the purest form of romance? True enough, to sacrifice yourself for someone you love. It was the ultimate proof of the bond you shared. But I didn't see it that way. It feels more tragic than romantic to me. If one of them dies, the other lives on, burdened with the guilt of a life lost on their behalf. Haunted by it every single day. That's not true. Sansa immediately refuted me, sitting upright beside me. If you ever died for me, I'd kill myself right after, so I wouldn't have to carry that guilt you're talking about. I stared at her, not understanding how she could say something like that so easily, and so bluntly. Romantic, sure, but wouldn't that make my sacrifice meaningless? Exactly. That's why you must never sacrifice yourself for me. No matter what. There it was again. Sansa trying to make me promise something. But I didn't. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, so I decided to be honest instead. Tell me, if one day you saw me about to die, would you throw your life away for me? Absolutely, she answered without a moment's hesitation, a smile on her face. Isn't that unfair? You ask me not to do something you're perfectly willing to do for me. You're right, but my life is worth far less than yours, Fry. That's why it's okay if I die. But you're not allowed to. Isn't that just hypocrisy? What even defines the value of a person's life? On what basis had she decided mine was worth more than hers? That kind of thinking wasn't universal. In fact, to me, it reeked of self-loathing, as if she hated herself and everything she represented. It's just my own selfishness. That was her excuse, and it didn't convince me at all. Sorry, but I'm going to have to reject that kind of selfishness. Lately, I felt like I had begun to understand Sansa, just a little. Behind that devilish smile she wore most of the time, there was something deeper, something darker, tangled in the depths of her heart. She looked like a carefree demon on the outside, but that wasn't true. She once told me she was living only for me, that I was the only reason she kept going. Her feelings for me were real, and I never denied them. Doing so would have been an insult to her. But I didn't want her to keep living like this. I wanted her to find a different reason. A reason to live for herself, not just for me. Unfortunately, I couldn't help her much with that. How could I, when only a few hours separated me from the enemy? Placing my palm gently atop her head, feeling those ivory horns, I rose to my feet, ready to leap down from the mast. Until the day we commit that double suicide you spoke of and die together, you're not allowed to die before me. And not after me either. So cling to life with everything you have, because I won't allow you to die. As I lifted my hand away, Sansa pressed both of hers to her head, fingering the roots of her snow-white hair. Unlike her usual hostile stance, she was remarkably calm now. That always happened whenever I took the lead in this strange bond between us. And it made me certain. That devilish persona she always tried to wear was never her true self. Let's go. I smiled at her one last time, and jumped down. Sansa didn't follow immediately. She remained sitting there for a while, a storm of thoughts no doubt raging inside her mind. Then, without warning, She vanished into her own shadow. Joining me, we were close now, close to them, to enemy territory. Chapter 465. The Abyss Unleashed. 2. On that freezing night, as snow and rain took turns falling from the heavens, the Imperial fleet neared its destination. A fact we confirmed the moment a thick fog swallowed the entire fleet. That fog was a signature of Sheskler Bay, the gateway to Ultra's territory. Entering it meant only one thing: we had arrived. Standing at the bow of the lead ship, we all gathered behind Bloodmater, who stared silently into the horizon with his empty white eyes. The silence was eerie. Beyond the creaking wood and crashing waves, no one dared make a sound. It was a moment of pure tension and focus. A strange phenomenon as 10,000 men fell into perfect silence at once. We were now officially within enemy land. Everyone knew this calm wouldn't last long. Slowly, I clenched my fist, feeling a violet light begin to swirl within my eyes. I could sense them, and so could every warrior on this ship. The enemy, hundreds, no thousands, of auras closing in around us. They were close, very close, but the thick fog still kept them hidden. They're right in front of us, but we can't see a thing. Bloodmater turned to us, nodding toward a certain person. Do it, Snow Lionheart. Light up this world once more. Reveal the enemies lurking behind this veil of fog. With a heavy breath, the crowned hero stepped forward. Behind him stood Saintess Yuasha. I'll support you. Thank you. Their words carried weight. A clear sign that a deep bond had formed between them during Snow's months of training in the church. Channeling her holy power, Yuasha poured her aura into Snow's body. In turn, Snow summoned Vermithor, unleashing the explosive energy that fused his aura with the Saintess's divine force. Manipulating the elements bent to his will, he moved the thick fog surrounding us with surreal ease, as if it were part of him. Across a radius of over 20 kilometers, Snow drew in all the fog. A breathtaking sight that left everyone stunned, witnessing the ease with which he commanded nature itself. Then, with the fog absorbed into his power, Snow raised his sword and fulfilled Bloodmater's request by lighting up the world once again. First sword, Solar Judgment. With a single swing of his blade, Snow reminded the world why he had been chosen as the next hero. The sky, dark just moments ago, became flooded with light, as if dawn had arrived early. His light pierced through the veil, shining directly upon the enemy that had been hiding behind the fog all along. It took a moment for the Imperial fleet to grasp what had happened. They were mesmerized by Snow's solar judgment, but they quickly snapped back to their senses once the scene before them became clear. They're here. Bloodmater's voice rang out, and at that exact moment, reality trembled. Swords were drawn, auras exploded, and battle cries echoed. The soldiers of the Empire, eyes burning with bloodlust, prepared themselves for the imminent clash. And how could they not? Because finally, on the far horizon, the enemy had arrived. Black ships. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, lined the horizon on the far end of the sea. Though we could barely make them out through the distance, it was enough to grasp the scale of what we were about to face. Their fleet was massive, undeniably larger than ours, and I could sense the auras of several powerful individuals among them. Auras I had already grown familiar with. But the numbers didn't matter much. Numbers had never been the deciding factor in war. Give the order, Bloodmater. With eyes glowing purple and killing intent I could no longer suppress, I turned to him. No, pleaded. Give the order and let the bloodbath begin. Now that I had reached the battlefield I'd long craved, I found it nearly impossible to hold back. This aura, this strength I had cultivated over months. I wanted to know just how far it could take me. I knew I was still a mere insect compared to those who watched from above. But this moment, this very battle, was the threshold. A chance to glimpse how far I could ascend. To break my chains, I needed overwhelming power. The kind of strength few ever reach. Was running out. But Bloodmater didn't share my impatience. He raised his hand to halt me and pointed toward something else entirely. Not yet. Look carefully at your enemy. Fry Starlight. Following his gaze, I finally understood what he meant. To the east, the Imperial fleet. To the west, the fleet of the Ultras. And in the stretch of sea between them, a platform had been erected. An ornate stage constructed in the middle of the cursed sea. The Ultras had sent a signal. The experts of the Empire understood it immediately. Before the battle begins, they want to talk? That's unexpected of them. Unlike their usual brutality, the Ultras were asking for a meeting between the two sides. We didn't know why. But surprisingly, Bloodmater didn't reject it. This is the first time they've requested anything like this since the First War 3 centuries ago. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. The war was inevitable. No words would change that. But these kinds of meetings were often used to shake an enemy's morale. To make a psychological strike before the real one. That the Ultras would request such a thing meant they had something prepared. Bloodmater chose to go himself, bringing only a small force meant to intimidate rather than negotiate. And just like that, in a matter of minutes, an unspoken agreement delayed the war. From the Empire's side, bathed in radiant white light, Bloodmater launched himself into the sky, flying toward the platform like a streak of lightning. Behind him, Snow and I followed. We were the Empire's finest talents, our strength eclipsing our peers by far. That's why Bloodmater chose us. For the enemy to see the true face of Imperial might. We crossed the distance in the blink of an eye and landed with flair upon the solid platform. Only to find them already there. 3 of them, and 3 of us. Chapter 466. The Abyss Unleashed. 3. But the auras of the Ultras were suffocating. 2 SS plus ranks, and 1 whose aura just brushes SS. I commented calmly as I scanned our enemies. Your senses are truly sharp. Fry Starlight. Sitting front and center was the infamous Lord of the Ultras, dressed in formal wear and that same luxurious coat, his beloved sword by his side. Gavid Lindman. Behind him stood a masked youth around our age. Though his face was hidden, his crimson eyes peered through the gaps and never left Snow. Just the sight of him was enough to trigger killing intent. It was V, and the third figure made a cold smile creep unconsciously across my face. A grotesquely massive figure wrapped in black bandages. None other than the cursed half-demon, Gvardiel, his sly grin fully intact. Well, welcome to my humble stage, dear guests from the Empire. Oddly enough, Gvardiel took the lead, speaking instead of Gavid. A fine delegation indeed. The former temple director, Bloodmater, the hero of the Empire, Snow Lionheart. And you! He turned to me with particular interest. Fry Starlight. They call you the Black Death on our side. You're famous, you know. He. He chuckled. But Bloodmater stepped forward, towering before him. They were the same size, true, but Gvardiel's power far surpassed his. That monster had already broken into SS+. You brought us here just to sing praises of our heroes, Ultra's Lord? If that's the case, then I believe fists would be a far better choice than words. Hold your horses, old man. You're rushing things. Isn't your generation supposed to be more composed? Gvardiel laughed, standing chest to chest with Bloodmater, as if the two were seconds away from throwing hands. But then, that's enough, Gvardiel. We didn't come here to play games. Interrupting from behind, Gavid Lindman finally stood and cut the tension with a cold, clipped tone. Champions of the Empire, I've come here today not as your enemy, but as your mercy. I came to offer you a choice. He raised a hand in front of Bloodmater and spoke with grim finality. Surrender. Don't start a doomed war that will lead only to your annihilation. If you do, I promise, those of you deemed worthy will be allowed to live. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Snow Lionheart stepped forward, his multicolored aura flaring violently. Each hue a reflection of the elements gifted to him. Is that really all you have to say, Lord of the Ultras? And here I thought you had something worthwhile to offer. But what came out of your mouth just now was nothing more than a hollow threat. Look at where you're standing. You're on the battlefield. Do you honestly think that someone who came all this way, prepared to die, would just fall to their knees at the sound of your pathetic words? Snow's fury was unmistakable, and his aura reflected it. But his pressure was immediately countered when V's body ignited in terrifying black flames, evening the scales in an instant. Don't be so eager to die, Snow Lionheart. And don't interrupt the supreme authority when he speaks. Lord Gavid Linman hasn't finished yet. And indeed, Gavid hadn't. Closing his eyes for a moment, the Lord of the Ultras opened them again, revealing a strange darkness swirling within. Tell me, Imperial Hero, who do you think you're fighting in this war? The Ultras. I already understood what Gavid was getting at. But I chose to let him continue. There was no point in hiding the truth any longer. You wanted something interesting? Fine. Here it is. Raising a single finger to the sky, Gavid Linman made a declaration that echoed across the world. The gates sealed by your first hero, Kazes Valerian, have been opened once more. There's nothing left separating us from Helmand, the land of demons. There it was. The moment he spoke those cursed words, I saw Snow and Bloodmater's faces turn to a grave, completely unable to process what they'd just heard. Even if you somehow managed to defeat the Ultras, what then? Do you really think that would be the end of it? Gavid laughed at our foolishness.
No.
That won't be the end. Because your true enemy isn't the Ultras. It's the ones above. The 10 high seats. And the Demon King himself. Beings who could erase insignificant creatures like us with a mere snap of their fingers. So tell me, what exactly do you hope to accomplish by waging a war you've already lost? It hit hard. That much was clear, even Bloodmater snapped. Lies. You're lying. Lying? And why would I do that? Gavid smirked. Everything I've said is truth. You'll come to face those horrors soon enough. And just like that, I realized Gavid had succeeded. Even if only slightly, he'd shaken our morale. But he hadn't broken it. We will not surrender, Snow said with steel in his voice, despite everything he had just heard. Just like our ancestors fought until their dying breaths, so will we, even if the gates of hell open right before our eyes. How naive, Imperial Hero. Gavid sighed, seemingly disappointed by our ignorance. Then, with a flick of his sword, everything changed. If you're that desperate to die, then die. Right here, right now. At his words, the platform beneath us trembled violently. Felt like an earthquake. But it wasn't. The sea around us began to churn, as something stirred beneath it. Not something, many things. Monsters. Horrid creatures of the nightmare. Surged from the depths like a curse summoned from the abyss. Snow and Bloodmater both flinched in genuine shock. They hadn't sensed them at all. From nothingness, the nightmare beasts had emerged. Their numbers were staggering. So many, in fact, that they immediately attacked the Imperial fleet from behind, striking when no one was prepared. Surrounded by tentacles and writhing limbs. We knew then, without doubt, we had been completely deceived. You cowards! Dogs will always be dogs. Bloodmater roared in rage. He had made a critical mistake. Believing the Ultras would respect custom and spare the envoys. He had been far too naive. With the Ultras trio before us, and the nightmare monsters at our back, we were completely surrounded. It was a position no one would envy. Chapter 467. The Abyss Unleashed. 4. Gavid Linman and V were about to make their move, but they stopped, because Gvardiel suddenly burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. He laughed so loudly it threatened to rupture their eardrums. He was truly ecstatic, completely intoxicated by the moment. Beatrice was right. Gvardiel screamed under the puzzled gazes of Gavid and V, who couldn't understand the reason for his sudden madness. Until he shouted, "You really are the best, Fry Starlight." The moment Gvardiel said my name, every gaze turned toward me, leaving both sides in confusion. Unlike Bloodmater and Snow, who were visibly shaken by what the Ultras had shown. I wore just one expression from beginning to end. A smile. A smile I hadn't even realized I was making. A sadistic, terrifying smile that hid a monstrous thirst for blood. You've been trying to kill me with your stare this entire time, Lord Starlight. I wonder, do you hate me? Do you want to see me dead? Maybe I did something to upset you, but right now I'm curious about something else entirely. Why, in the name of hell, are you smiling like that in a situation like this? Gvardiel asked, sounding genuinely intrigued. I took my first step forward since arriving at the platform they'd built with their own hands. My apologies, gentlemen. There seems to be a misunderstanding here. Step by step, I moved closer to Bloodmater and Snow. But before I clear that up, I have a question for you, bandaged freak. Gvardiel. Fixing my gaze on him, my eyes blazed with a violet glow. Ever since we entered the Shiskler Bay, I've been tracking everything. Your army of 35,000 men, the presence of the Hollows and the Lords, even the nightmare creatures you hid in the depths. They all stared at me in disbelief, especially when I gave the exact number of their forces. But you, half-demon, I never sensed your aura, never heard your breath, not even the beat of your heart. It was as if you didn't exist at all. Before we begin, I have to ask, how did you do it? It was genuine curiosity. Gvardiel was the only one who surprised me, because unlike the others, I couldn't feel him. During my training, I had honed my senses to perfection, to the point where I could detect anything within my domain. For him to escape, that meant he was hiding something. And indeed, he laughed in response. My heartbeat? My breath? You're truly insane, Lord Starlight. To go that far. What kind of senses do you even have? With a filthy smile, Gvardiel ripped away the black bandages covering his chest, revealing a grotesquely mutated body leaking foul black fluid, with gray skin riddled in deep, unnatural holes. What lay within those holes wasn't flesh or blood, but rot and corruption. You're right, Lord Starlight. I have no pulse, no breath. I've been dead for a long, long time. He laughed as his body erupted with a massive shadow aura. As for my aura, I simply suppressed it with a skill I possess. That's why you couldn't sense me. There. Are you happy now? Hearing his answer, I nodded. I see. Impressive, really? Well, you're going to die anyway, so no harm in granting one of your last wishes, right? He was absolutely convinced he had me cornered. I told you earlier. You're misunderstanding something. I placed my right hand on Snow's shoulder and my left on Bloodmater's. The smile on my face deepened. These two, they came here as emissaries, for a conversation. With a snap of my fingers, Snow and Bloodmater vanished from the platform in an instant, leaving me alone with the enemy. Back aboard the ship, neither of them understood how they had returned, completely unaware of my teleportation ability. And after sending them away, I slowly lowered my arms, then spread them wide, facing my foes. As for me, I came here for one reason, and one reason only. At that moment, those words, the world darkened, the void trembled, and the nightmare creatures screamed in terror. The expressions on the Ultra's elite turned to horror. Releasing my aura, I finally drew my swords, letting loose the bloodlust I had kept buried until now. I came here today to slaughter every last one of you. And I'm starting with you, bastard who killed Danzo. My hysterical scream, laced with overwhelming killing intent, left the Ultras unable to react. They realized far too late that their entire plan had been effortlessly obliterated by a single man. That aura, this cursed aura. Staring at me in disbelief, Gavid Lindman couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. How? How in the hell is his aura beyond SS+? What he felt wasn't SS+. It had surpassed it entirely, reaching the mythical realm of SSS. The three of them couldn't make sense of it, but I didn't give them the time to think. 1 second I was in front of them. The next I had vanished entirely. With blades burning in merciless black aura, I unleashed the full power I had gathered until now. 10,000 steps of shadow, supreme art. Abyssal wave. I didn't have the luxury of fighting the nightmare creatures and the ultras one by one, so I made my choice. I would annihilate them all in a single strike. An all-out assault, the unleashed peak of the 10,000 steps of shadow. Abyssal wave. The impact was devastating. Using pure shadow aura, I tore through everything in the battlefield, ripping apart the nightmare creatures, the waves, the very land itself, and even the ultras elite. All in one blow. Shadow slashes appeared out of nowhere, tearing through everything in their path. Within seconds, the sea turned crimson with blood. Those once mighty beasts that ruled the ocean screamed as they fell, one after another, slaughtered by my overwhelming strike. And the moment I cleared the battlefield of those nightmarish abominations, I surged forward, riding a dark meteor, charging straight at Gvardiel, who was still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. But Gavid Lindman reacted instantly, rushing to his side as soon as he saw me coming, grasping the ether, ready for battle. But it didn't matter. I had been prepared to face all of them. From the start. 10,000 steps of shadow, supreme art, void carving. With a dual slash of my blades, I released a colossal wave of dark aura. A devastating tide that shattered the entire platform and buried the lords of the ultras deep within the boiling depths of the demonic sea, which evaporated under the sheer pressure. And as I tore through my enemies, I laughed, like a madman. Finally, at long last, I could release it, the power I had built. I can let it all out now. I didn't have to hold back anymore. Not here. Not on this battlefield. Here, I could finally kill them. I can finally kill all those bastard sons of whores. In that moment, it had officially begun. The first battle of the War of Darkness. Chapter 468. Slaughter in Shiskler Bay 1. The Ultras had never been a people one could reason with using words. That was a well-established fact. A fact that had been proven beyond any doubt today. After luring the Empire's forces into their territory, the Ultras managed to trap them in a carefully prepared ambush. The waters of the Shesseler Gulf erupted in a terrifying explosion, revealing the horrors that had been lurking in its depths. A massive swarm of sea-dwelling nightmare creatures launched a synchronized assault, unleashing devastating destruction upon the Empire's fleet. The scene was terrifying. A perfect painting of death unfolding upon the ocean. Tentacles and feelers wrapped tightly around ships, dragging them down one after another, along with everyone on board. These maritime disasters were mostly of rank S and even beyond that, and the worst part was that there were hundreds of them, flooding the sea like a swarm of monsters. How the hell did the Ultras manage to control so many of them? One of the Imperial officers screamed, wiping the blood from his face as he tried to cut away the tendrils threatening to sink his ship. The Ultras had long used nightmare creatures in war, but never before had the Empire seen them control such a vast number, especially sea-type nightmare creatures. The kind that dwelled in the deep, rarely surfacing, beasts that resembled krakens from another world, some mutated oceanic horrors akin to giant sharks. These monsters had hidden far below the surface, completely out of the Empire's detection. That was why Snow and the others hadn't sensed their presence at all. At the exact moment the nightmare creature struck, the Ultras seized the opportunity, bombarding the fleet with magical cannons, arrows, and destructive spells. The attacks rained from above like a torrential storm, from below and from above. The Empire's vanguard was completely surrounded. And yet, despite the desperate situation, this was not a one-sided battle. The members of the special unit quickly scattered, rushing to aid the other ships under siege. Phoenix was like a moving volcano, a volcano that poured its fire into the sea, vaporizing it along with every nightmare creature swimming within. On the other side, Snow Lionheart unleashed his full arsenal of elemental powers, blasting everything in his path. Saintus Urasha and Uriel both channeled waves of divine energy across vast distances, forming shields around the Imperial soldiers. shields that not only blocked the Ultra's attacks, but also healed the wounded. Meanwhile, Bloodmater's flagship forced its way through the monstrous tide, desperately trying to reach Fry. "We have to hurry. Fry Starlight is fighting their commanders alone out there," Snow Lionheart shouted, his voice heavy with urgency. "I know that, damn it," Bloodmater growled, gritting his teeth. Gathering his radiant aura, he punched forward, unleashing a wave of destruction that tore the sea apart in front of him. What the hell is that kid thinking? To stay there alone? Surrounded by 3 SS-ranked monsters or higher, plus the nightmare creatures, no matter how he looked at it, it seemed like a suicide mission. He had been completely fooled by the enemy, never expecting them to prepare a trap of this scale. And to make matters worse, he still didn't understand how Fry had managed to send him and Snow back to the ship with just a single touch. There's no need to worry. Fry is holding his ground just fine. Standing atop the ship's mast, at the highest point with a panoramic view of the battlefield, Sansa bombarded the surrounding sea monsters with her deadly shadow blades. At the same time, she summoned her shadow tendrils to fight off any creature that dared approach the ship. Her demonic eyes were locked far into the distance, deep among the swarm of sea beasts. From time to time, she tracked the violent aura bursts from Frey's attacks, each one leaving a wave of destruction in its wake. Even though he looked like nothing more than a speck from that distance, she could tell almost exactly how he was doing. Holding his ground? "Did you not see who his enemies are?" Snow shouted from afar, still manipulating the elements one after another. Meanwhile, Uriel Platini tried to support Fry with her divine powers, but the distance was simply too great, leaving her unable to contribute much. "I'll go help him. I'm confident I can reach him quickly using Void Step." Snow made up his mind, determined to rush in and aid Fry, who was fighting alone. But a dense wave of shadows suddenly coiled around him, blocking his path. It was Sansa. "What you should be focusing on right now is the enemy around you. If you leave, the Empire's fleet won't survive." As she spoke, Sansa continued to conjure more and more shadow blades, raining them down from the sky and tearing the nightmare creatures apart. "Fry is strong. He won't fall that easily. Trust that if he were truly in danger right now, I would have gone to him myself. Instead of staying here with all of you, between the lives of 100,000 men and Frey's life." Sansa wouldn't have hesitated for even a single second. The fact that she hadn't moved yet was the clearest proof that Lord Starlight was still holding on. "The war has officially begun, and it started with a disaster on our side. Fry is out there fighting alone to turn the tide in our favor. So don't you dare throw his efforts away with a reckless intervention that's not even needed." The Special Vanguard unit's top priority right now was to get the fleet out of the Nightmare Tide with as little damage as possible, preparing for the battle that would immediately follow against the Ultra's main forces. According to Fry, the Ultra's fleet numbered 35,000 soldiers. In other words, they already outnumbered them, without even accounting for the nightmare creatures. In situations like this, the burden of turning the tables fell squarely on their shoulders. That's what Sansa wanted people like Snow and Uriel to understand. Bloodmater could only acknowledge how right the princess was. She had spoken the very words he himself should have said. "Everyone, focus on the enemies around us. The nightmare creatures are our top priority right now." There was no room for error, not in this situation. And so, under Bloodmater's command, the special unit took the burden of the entire war upon themselves. "Let's clean up this side quickly. I don't like seeing one of my students fighting alone." Using his full power, Phoenix Sunlight was the most effective warrior on the battlefield. His flames, the natural enemy of sea-dwelling nightmare beasts. Racing against time, the Empire's forces tried to break out of the encirclement as fast as possible. For what was to come, and for Fry, the latter had gone far ahead, taking on the strongest of the Ultras by himself. Even though Sansa expressed confidence in him, it didn't reflect the growing worry festering within her with every passing second. Her demonic eyes never stopped tracking him, which made it nearly impossible for her to fight at full power against the nightmare creatures. Her body was here with the others. But her mind was already elsewhere. The moment she sensed he was in even the slightest danger, she was ready to go to him immediately, even if it meant abandoning everyone else. You could say that Fry Starlight had significantly reduced the damage suffered by the fleet. His slaughter of so many nightmare creatures in the front lines was the main reason the ambush had ended up weaker than what the enemy had planned. Without him, the attack would have been far more devastating. That alone changed everything. Not to mention the fact he held off the enemy commanders on his own. Wherever he went, whatever battlefield he walked upon, Fry always seemed to be fated for the same thing. To fight more than anyone else, to bleed more than anyone else, and to kill more than anyone else. It was a cycle he had repeated many times lately. But unlike before, this time, he welcomed it. He wanted it. He craved it. Which explained that damned smile carved across his face since the start of the battle. A bloody grin that said more than words ever could. Chapter 469. Slaughter in Shiskler Bay 2. No matter how brutal the other battles in the Bay of Shiskler had seemed, they didn't even come close to what was happening here. Amid the raging sea, surrounded by the screeches of nightmare creatures being torn apart by black swords, Lord Starlight fought his own battle. The one he had been waiting for all along, using the water beneath their feet as if it were solid ground created for them alone. Two dark forces clashed. Two black auras collided violently, engaging in a dizzying high-speed exchange between two monsters no human logic could describe. Fry danced with his blades like they were extensions of his body, slicing at Gvardiel, who met each strike with bare fists. The exchange was lightning fast, and despite its brutality, both men wore grins on their faces. Gvardiel unleashed shadows from his body, launching them at Fry, but the latter shredded through them effortlessly. "You've broken through to SS+, then, Gvardiel. I take it your training in Helmand paid off." Boom! Unleashing wave after wave of SS-class dark aura, Fry pressured him mercilessly, forcing Gvardiel to retreat. "How long did you spend there this time?" "1 year." Boom! 2 years. Boom! Both the Dark Sister and Balerion tore through Gvardiel's hardened flesh relentlessly, while the newly crowned Lord of the Ultras failed to retaliate. His grin cracking bit by bit, especially when Fry revealed he knew about Helmand, and how time passed more slowly there. No matter how hard Gvardiel struck, he always ended up with a more mangled arm. His blood spilling non-stop. But the damage was still shallow for now. "You talk a lot, Lord Starlight. I'll admit. You're the strangest opponent I've ever fought on this planet." Despite the intense pressure Fry applied, Gvardiel didn't seem particularly troubled. "You're getting ahead of yourself. Do you really think you can win?" His aura swelled menacingly, and the shadows around him hardened into a black, metallic substance. Unnaturally dense and unbreakable. That substance continued to take shape from within Gvardiel's body, specifically from the black pits scattered across his flesh. "You have no idea how terrifying this world we live in truly is, Lord Starlight. The power you take pride in is nothing but a trivial speck compared to real power." Unleashing it, Gvardiel created hundreds of black spikes from the metallic substance, hurling them at Fry. The attack was unbelievably fast. So fast that Fry couldn't even see it coming, let alone react in time. As a result, he took devastating damage. The assault was brutal, terrifying. Dozens of bloody holes erupted across Frey's body. One of the dark spikes even pierced his left eye, carving a bloody crater across his face. His blood poured out in torrents as his body staggered backward. Gvardiel burst into manic laughter, having flipped the tide with a single blow. "You're weaker than I thought, Lord Starlight. At this rate, you'll meet the same end as that friend of yours you came to avenge." With Fry left broken by the strike, Gavid Lindman suddenly appeared behind him, wielding the ether blade and aiming straight for his neck. The attack came fast, and Fry looked utterly ruined. But just as the sword neared his throat, Gvardiel saw it. He saw something that instantly wiped the laughter off his face. Because even in that state, riddled with gory wounds, with one eye completely destroyed, even as he collapsed before Gavid's blade, the cold smile on Fry Starlight's face never disappeared. It only widened, becoming more menacing. That sight, for some reason, sent shivers down Gvardiel's spine. And rightfully so, because just before the blade could cut through Frey's neck, time froze. The flow of the ether halted just inches from Frey's face. Time itself had been stopped. For 1 second, and in that second, neither Gavid Linman nor Gvardiel could move. Just 1 second. Yet in battles like these, a single second was fatal. In that second of frozen time, Fry moved freely. As if the laws of nature meant nothing to him. Within that moment, he parried the ether blade with Dark Sister. Then, with one swing of Balerion, he carved a monstrous gash across Gavid Linman's chest, making the Ultra's Lord collapse backward, blood pouring from his body. And before the second ended, Fry appeared right in front of Gvardiel. The latter could see it clearly. Time had stopped for his body, but not for his mind. In that single second, the world had turned into Frey's domain, a realm where he could do as he pleased. As they stared at each other, with bloodshot eyes locking, Gvardiel couldn't comprehend what was happening. Fry, his ruined left eye still dripping, looked completely calm, as if he hadn't been injured at all. Then, with a blindingly fast strike, Gvardiel felt his chest shatter as Balerion plunged deep into him. That was the last thing Fry did before the 1 second time freeze. His newly acquired ability screenshot came to an end. As time resumed, Gavid Linman fell backward, clutching the deep wound across his chest. Meanwhile, Gvardiel and Fry stood facing one another. Then, without warning, Balerion, still buried in Gvardiel's chest, flared with a massive surge of dark aura. A devastating burst of energy tore through Gvardiel's body, exiting from his back and enveloping everything behind him in a curtain of darkness. From that monstrous blast, Gvardiel coughed up a torrent of black blood and dropped to one knee before Fry. His face twisted in agony. The Ultra's Lord screamed, a tortured howl like a wounded beast experiencing a pain it had never known. Kneeling before Fry, the latter simply chuckled. "You spoke of power, half-demon." Looking down on him as if he were nothing but an insect, Fry yanked the blade out of Gvardiel's body, then shoved it into his opponent's mouth, gripping his face tightly. "Let me show you something interesting." As if awaiting his command, violet flames erupted across Frey's body, swirling around his wounds with eerie precision. And before Gvardiel's bewildered eyes, Frey's injuries vanished completely. No, his body regenerated, even growing back a new eye to replace the one lost. He returned to peak form, as if he'd never been wounded at all. "It took me 8 months to attain this strength you mocked." Chapter 470. Slaughter in Shiskler Bay 3. Fry moved his hand, so fast that it left nothing but afterimages. Balerion, now fused with that hand, shone with a terrifying violet glow as he carved deep into Gvardiel's body. One slash, then another, then a third, then dozens, hundreds. Fry ripped his foe apart, torturing him, ignoring the torrents of black blood pouring from Gvardiel's shredded frame. "I don't care how many years you spent training in Helmand. But you must have worked really hard. Now look at you. Everything you worked for wasted against a mere human who only trained for 8 months. It's painful, isn't it? To lose in such a humiliating way." Gvardiel's blood flooded the surrounding sea without pause. The previous exchange hadn't even lasted a few seconds, all due to Frey's monstrous speed. As a result, Gavid Linman couldn't reach in time, even after trying to heal himself. The one who stepped in was the masked man, V. He attacked from behind, unleashing a massive wave of dark fire aimed at swallowing Fry whole. But Fry responded with a single flick of his free hand. The one holding the Dark Sister. With that simple motion, He launched a wave of darkness that clashed directly with V's own. In the raging waters of Shizkar Bay, darkness and black fire collided, each trying to consume the other. V kept hurling his flames relentlessly, launching attack after attack. But for every swing he made, Fry answered with 10. The black flames were far stronger than ordinary dark aura. But Frey's aura was simply endless. Fighting V with one hand and destroying Gvardiel with the other, Fry continued to mock Gvardiel. I wonder, what does someone with a dead body feel? Do you still feel pain? Do you feel rage? If you're dead, can you even be killed? With the same maniacal grin, Fry laughed in his opponent's face. Let's find the answer together. Gvardiel. Amid the destruction caused by the clash of black fire and Frey's darkness, after having his body mercilessly and repeatedly shredded, kneeling before him, the world bore witness to a horrific sight. A man torn limb from limb by a merciless black sword. Frey's strikes had been so precise, not a single spot was left untouched. What remained of Gvardiel was nothing more than a mutilated chunk of meat, barely recognizable. A tattered mass sank slowly into the raging sea. This battle was far from over, and it would have been foolish for any of the strong to reveal their full power from the beginning, whether Fry or his enemies. Everyone knew that well, yet Fry had overwhelmed them in terrifying fashion. Just one young man had pushed them this far with his incomprehensible power. Gvardiel had been at a disadvantage from the start, unable to spread his shadow due to fighting above the ocean's surface. One could say he was handicapped from the very beginning. But to be humiliated like that clearly shook him, and that explained what happened the moment his body sank into the sea. Without warning, a terrifying explosion of shadow aura erupted, sending shockwaves across the entire battlefield. The aura of shadows kept spreading at such an overwhelming volume that it took shape as a black pillar that pierced the sky. The crushing pressure it emitted caught the attention of everyone in Shizkar. It was a declaration. That monster was done playing. Standing before the towering pillar of aura, Fry didn't flinch. He only laughed when he realized he had gotten exactly what he wanted. So you finally decided to unleash your full strength. Having been pushed to the edge, Gvardiel had no choice but to explode. Bearing witness to that, rage flared on Gavid Linman's face nearby. Gvardiel, damned bastard. You're going this far just from being pushed a little? Damn you! Fixing his gaze on Fry, Gavid gripped his sword as his body lit up with the glow of dark aura. Fry Starlight is strong and unpredictable. He's full of strange tricks, but he's still just one man. Surveying the battlefield, Gavid Linman checked on his subordinate V. The latter was nearby too, and like Gavid, he hadn't yet fought seriously. He had only been observing, just as his master had taught him. Fry was the one surrounded here, not them. He was the one who should have been forced to go all out. But Gvardiel had ruined everything, once again proving just how dangerous Fry was. He had toyed with them all far too easily. If it's come to this, then he must die. As his eyes darkened, Gavid raised his blade. Phantom form. The battle was about to escalate far beyond its previous limits. And the main event was about to begin. Between Fry and the man who had risen from the ocean's depths. The Gvardiel whom Fry had just destroyed was no longer the same as the one who now stood before him. This new body was entirely coated in the same black metal from before, a shell of dark armor that made him look like an iron statue. His muscles pulsed with terrifying power, encased in the swirling aura of shadow. His face had morphed completely, eyes now glowing a blood-red crimson. Gvardiel was utterly serious, face to face with Fry. The two exchanged glances for a moment, then, without warning, they vanished. Two trails of darkness slashed through the air as they collided violently, stronger than ever before, sending shockwaves through the sea beneath them. As Frey's swords clashed with Gvardiel's iron fists, they tore into one another, detonating waves of shadow and darkness alike. Gvardiel's fists hammered into Frey's blades again and again, But this time, each impact sparked only blazing sparks of metal on metal. No longer the flesh Fry was used to cutting. In this new form, Gvardiel was absurdly tough, faster, stronger. He immediately pressed down on Fry in their clash. Fry tried slashing again and again, but it was useless. His opponent's body had become something else entirely. So this is your peak, Gvardiel. Boom! Their auras erupted once more. The real battle had only just begun. Chapter 471. The Starlight Requiem 1. Fry Starlight's POV. There are only a few fragile threads separating life from death. In this cruel world we live in, a world that rewards the strong with greater violence and dominance while crushing the weak into misery. Encounters with life and death moments are all too frequent. In a land where the strong devour the weak, one often finds themselves thrown into the jaws of fate, forced to endure trials of sheer existence. I don't know how many times the average person is supposed to face such situations in their short life, but unlike most, I've encountered them more times than I can count. More than anyone else, perhaps. And the one I found myself in now was definitely one of them. Gvardiel, the most enigmatic half-demon of his kind, had finally unleashed his full power. I had pushed him to that point, forced him to reveal his true nature to the world. His body had transformed in a strange and terrifying way. That dark, foreign metal that once partially covered him now wrapped around his form completely. No, it's more accurate to say that his entire body had become that unknown black metal. I had torn his previous form apart, reduced it to shreds, yet somehow, he rose again, reformed, reborn in a shell of unbreakable darkness. Dark aura. Pure shadow coiled around the frame of that metallic body, enhancing his strikes and unveiling the raw brutality of an SS Plus class. In that monstrous form, he was far stronger than the previous Lord, Godfrey. Fry Starlight, do you know what drives an enemy more than anything else? Having completely cornered me, Gvardiel kept up the pressure, his voice deeper, more monstrous than before. His blows were impossibly fast, frequently bypassing my defenses. The sparks that erupted from our collisions spread like wildfire, igniting waves of magical flame around us. Flames burned atop the ocean itself, unnaturally and beautifully. This version of Gvardiel was nothing like the one I'd fought before. After fighting humans countless times, I've come to one conclusion: the enemy driven by vengeance is always the most relentless. Boom! With a rocket-like punch that made my bones tremble, Gvardiel drove me further back. An enemy fighting for vengeance always puts on the best show before I kill them in cold blood. That has always been my greatest thrill here on planet Earth. But you, Lord Starlight, you're the first enemy who's ever made me truly want to kill. His smile had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wrath. Shadow aura swirled violently around his arms, each punch causing a massive explosion that shook the battlefield to its core. They struck me like bolts of lightning, so fast I could barely track them. Though I blocked most of his blows, my bones quivered with each impact. In raw physical power, Gvardiel was on an entirely different level. But I had expected at least this much from the beginning. I see. So you're angry, aren't you, half-demon? Accelerating my steps, I gathered more and more dark aura around my blades and began striking back, slashing into Gvardiel and delivering a staggering wave of damage with each blow. Yet no matter how hard I struck him, I couldn't make him bleed. His metal shell absorbed the damage with disturbing ease. Meanwhile, his attacks kept wounding me over and over, until my blood pooled beneath my feet in a massive crimson lake. Even so, every injury I suffered regenerated instantly. I didn't care much for the damage. Despite Gvardiel revealing everything he had, I never once felt like I was truly losing. His power was overwhelming, yes, but I blocked most of what he threw at me. Level 3 Shadow Adaptation. Max level Swordsmanship. These two together elevated my sword art to heights I never thought possible. Even while locked in combat with Gvardiel, I kept one eye on both Gavid Linman and V, and I realized something important. I wasn't the same person anymore. To be honest, I used to think that when I finally saw you again, I'd be overwhelmed with rage, that I'd try to kill you on sight. Boom! For Danzo, the hatred had been festering in me for some time. Ever since my training began, I envisioned this moment over and over again. I wanted to use that rage as fuel, to destroy you. That was my only wish for so long, and truth be told, I expected to feel that way when I saw you standing beside Gavid Linman and V. I retreated from Gvardiel, bombarding him from a distance with a torrent of shadow slashes. His armored body absorbed them all without effort. At first glance, the fight seemed to have hit a stalemate. I couldn't hurt him, and he couldn't stop my regeneration. But reality was far more nuanced than that. I thought I'd hate you even more, Gvardiel, but when I look at you now, somehow, those feelings have faded, replaced by something else entirely. Raising my blade toward him, I offered one final smile. Unfortunately for you, I now see nothing but another enemy that must be killed. A nuisance whose very existence taints this world. It'll be a far better place once people like you are dead. Standing there, surrounded by enemies, as fire raged around me, and the thunder of war roared in my ears, I felt nothing toward my opponent. Nothing at all. I didn't even feel the urge to avenge Danzo anymore. I simply wanted to kill him, like any other Ultra's warrior. And to do that, to bring down monsters of his caliber, I needed to unleash a single overwhelming attack. One blow with enough destructive force to bypass his defense and bring him down. But landing such a strike wasn't easy, especially in my current state. Without warning, Gavid Linman reappeared behind me with terrifying speed. I instantly responded, parrying his sword with the Dark Sister, then slashing through him with Balerion, but my blade passed right through his body. Phantom form, huh? I exchanged blows rapidly with Gavid Linman, who used that ghostly state to phase through everything I threw at him. At the same time, Gvardiel rushed in to join the fray. Left and right, they bombarded me with a barrage of deadly strikes, all aimed to finish me off. The ether blade carved illusions in the air, slashing through me, while Gvardiel's punches shattered my body again and again. I was completely surrounded. I fought back with all I had, managing to block and counter several times, but the limits of what I could achieve in this state were painfully clear. Both of them had reached SS+ rank. The longer the battle dragged on, the more my shadow adaptation gave me a growing edge. But I would be long dead before it fully took effect. I already knew that, which meant I couldn't afford a war of attrition. I had no idea what hidden tricks they still had under their belts. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, a volcanic eruption of black fire fell from the sky. Chapter 472. The Starlight Requiem. 2. It devoured everything in its path, including Gavid Linman and Gvardiel. V's fire attack consumed a massive section of the battlefield, ensuring I had nowhere to dodge. His strike harmed his allies too. But Gavid Linman used his phantom form to become fully intangible, while Gvardiel's metal body simply withstood the flames. Neither of them suffered any damage. I, on the other hand, was completely incinerated. The black flames scorched me so thoroughly that most of my body was reduced to charred flesh. The stench of burning skin and meat filled my nose. I must have looked horrifying. I realized that when I saw the reflection of my face on my blade, I had been burned to a crisp, and yet, even as a walking lump of coal, I kept fighting, dodging their attacks, returning damage with every clash. The three of us moved so fast, the eye couldn't track our movements. The clash of blades was the only sound that echoed through the battlefield. A whirlwind of swords, a blazing metallic inferno that consumed everything around it. He can still fight like this, even after all that. Gavid Linman, stunned by my tenacity, couldn't understand how I was still standing. Sorry, but pain doesn't mean much to me. Continuing to fight them both while enduring V's scorching flames, my enhanced senses registered everything happening around the war zone. My awareness expanded, taking in every detail, including the dire situation behind me, where the Empire's forces were struggling. After taking massive damage from the nightmare beasts, the Ultra's ships launched a full assault, encircling the Empire's forces from all sides. They had deliberately avoided the zone where I was fighting Gvardiel and the others, instead focusing their power on the Empire's fleet. That must have been Gavid Linman's plan. A command he gave at some point while I was busy battling Gvardiel. It had to be, first, wear down the Empire's fleet with nightmare beasts and destroy most of their ships. Then finish off the rest with a massive final assault from the Ultra's main fleet. They had already guessed the Empire wouldn't send its full strength from the start, and would begin with a smaller vanguard. That's why they sent 35,000 men, a force overwhelming compared to what we had. As for me, despite being a potential threat, they were confident I wouldn't survive a deathmatch against all three of them, and what was happening now only proved them right. I had become a charred corpse, covered in dozens of horrific wounds. Gavid Linman and Gvardiel had beaten me to pulp, while V burned me again and again in perfect coordination. Even though I kept resisting until the bitter end, it was becoming clear how this battle would end. This was what it meant to face three warriors, each beyond SS rank. Even if I managed to unleash SS plus level power myself, 3 versus 1 was still nearly impossible. He's going to fall soon. That was probably what Gavid Linman thought. The fact I'd lasted this long was already a miracle in itself. In the end, how dull. So this is all you've got? Gvardiel spoke, his voice tinged with disappointment as he began to lose interest in me. He had expected to fight some kind of monstrous legend, but his opponent had fallen faster than he ever imagined. It made him realize that he had overestimated me, using one of his trump cards against a mere boy. The battle was already over. Abraham Starlight had been a special case, and it was a mistake to compare his son, Fry, to him. Miracles only happen once, and the Starlight family had already used up theirs. Fry Starlight had been completely defeated. The young man whose very name struck terror into the hearts of the Ultras was now on the verge of collapse. Your death will mark the beginning of the end, for the Empire and everything it stands for. As they ripped his body apart, Gavid and Gvardiel continued to spit poison into Frey's ears. If this were Abraham Starlight, he would have handled the situation with ease. But the son is nothing like the father. From the very beginning, comparing him to the Starlight family's greatest star had been nothing but a fantasy. The Black Death, a meaningless title, earned only by killing a handful of the weak. Fry Starlight built his reputation on a lie, and that lie was finally about to collapse. With his features burned beyond recognition, the so-called Lord Starlight had never looked more pathetic. Time to end this. Readying his blade once more, the masked V prepared to deliver the final blow. Watching Fry from afar, his opponent looked utterly defeated. That much was obvious. And yet, for some reason, V couldn't stop staring into those eyes of the Lord Starlight. They glowed with a violet light, the only thing still shining in his charred, broken form. Eyes, calm, deep, and composed. Eyes that made V question. What exactly was Fry Starlight seeing? Was he even here in the first place? He had held out well, longer than expected, but that was all. In the end, he would fall like the rest. Still, V couldn't shake that gnawing feeling. A strange discomfort that refused to leave him, as if something was deeply, horribly wrong. And right as that foreboding thought surfaced, Fry, charred and broken, curled his lips into a pitiful smile before speaking. His voice strained and low. Abraham Starlight is Abraham Starlight, and I am simply Fry Starlight. I'm not a copy of my father, nor his second coming. I am who I am. That's all. He said those words, then vanished, teleporting between Gavid Linman and Gvardiel with seamless, perfect precision. The movement was so clean, so fast that there was no way to perceive it at all. Gavid Linman scowled, narrowing his eyes at Frey's newly revealed skill. His spatial ability, it's on par with Murgo's. A teleportation of that caliber wasn't something one could just learn casually. Yet Frey executed it as if it were second nature. Chapter 473, Nameless Judgment. Raising both his swords, a violet flame surged over his body, reconstructing it with terrifying speed. The Lord Starlight's face appeared anew, clean and untouched. "My apologies, gentlemen," Frey said with a renewed calmness. "It took me a bit of time to come up with the right plan." Releasing that ominous aura once again, he shook the entire battlefield. "A plan to deal with both of you, and the fleet behind you." The pressure emanating from Frey now was undoubtedly the peak of what he could produce. Since mastering the third stage of shadow adaptation, he had gained full control over his aura. As a result, his strikes had grown far deadlier. But what he was about to unleash now was on a whole different level, a terrifying level that sent chills through the hearts of his enemies. It drove them to attack immediately. But it was already too late. Standing precisely where he had intended, Frey targeted his next strike not only at them, but everything behind them as well. If I'm being honest, I could have continued fighting in better ways. There was more he could have done, more tricks he hadn't used, but Frey had taken his time, planning the most optimal way to end this. Understanding the dire position of his allies, he didn't have the luxury to prolong the battle any longer. He also wanted to know exactly how his current power measured up against his strongest enemies. From deep within him, a dark aura fused with shadows exploded outward. A twisted, cursed energy wrapped in black flame. That power coiled violently around Frey's twin blades, like furious serpents ready to strike. The pressure it radiated was unmistakably within the SSS rank. The idea first came to me during my 5th month of training. As his body surged with energy, drowning the world in darkness, Frey's mind drifted back to his days in the Eastern Nightmare Lands. Ignition had always been my strongest attack, but it was never efficient. Just a massive explosion that destroyed everything indiscriminately. Ignition was powerful, yes, but it was meant for large-scale battles. Situations where Frey was surrounded by weaker enemies. It was never suited for one-on-one duels. And so, Frey dedicated most of his time to creating something new. It shares the same core principle as Ignition, an attack that channels all of his power into a single moment. But instead of releasing it chaotically, he pours everything into his swords. Just a single swing. A simple, seemingly harmless motion. Yet space itself tore apart before that harmless strike. In the past, Frey Starlight spent long, agonizing months doing nothing but swinging his sword. He swung again and again, until his arm cracked, his fingers bled, and the very cells in his hand died from overuse. But he simply regenerated them, and repeated the process. Again and again, he destroyed himself, and rebuilt stronger each time. A madman's training. One no sane person could endure. But Frey endured. And by the end of those 8 brutal months, he had become something else entirely. His blade cleaved through mountains, tore through forests, ripped the sky, and scattered the clouds. All with a single swing that didn't even use aura. Perfect swing. Now, Frey was about to pour SSS rank aura into that one swing. And the result was catastrophic. A natural disaster. The earth itself seemed to shriek in terror at what it was about to witness. That one swing, it was more than enough to be the final stage Frey personally added to his ultimate style. 10,000 steps of shadow. Frey Starlight's technique, the Nameless Judgment. A truly nameless strike. A strike that carved Frey Starlight's name into history. That single swing marked the end for many. The colossal wave of darkness Frey unleashed obliterated everything in its path. Gvardiel, Gavid, and V were swallowed instantly, and as the dark slash continued, it tore the sea itself in two. ripping through the Ultra fleet that had launched the assault on the Empire's forces. In their final moments, the soldiers of the Ultras saw nothing but pitch-black oblivion. A darkness that sent them to their graves without mercy. The damage was on a cataclysmic scale. The nameless judgment showed no restraint, threatening to consume everything in its path into oblivion. But then, as if by magic, the catastrophe vanished completely as it approached the Empire's ranks, revealing Frey's absolute control over his newfound power. All of it happened in a matter of seconds. Just seconds. That redefined what true overwhelming power meant. Seconds that reshaped the map itself. As the Sea of Sheskler was cleaved in half. Out of 35,000 Ultra troops, over 15,000 perished in an instant. Erased by the void that had come from nowhere. Back on the battlefield, Gavid Linman was the only one lucky enough to survive the strike clean, thanks to his ghost-like ability that allowed him to phase out of reality. Staring at the aftermath, his expression turned grim, especially as he saw Gvardiel's body, cleanly sliced in half, despite the man's monstrous defense. As for V, he survived only by activating his Berserker shield at the last second. Even so, despite using an SS-rank artifact, V suffered such tremendous damage that he lost consciousness on the spot. Removed from the fight entirely. Of the three, 2 were taken down. Of the 35,000 soldiers, 15,000 were gone in a blink. With a wide smile, Frey looked up at the sky. This is my current peak. That strike was everything he had. Perhaps it was still insignificant compared to those above. But it was the first step he needed. Are you watching? I wonder. Were they still observing him from afar? If the answer is yes, then keep watching from the front row seats. Watch as I rise. Rise to a level that shatters every limit this world has to offer. And on that day, Frey Starlight declared his existence to the entire world. Chapter 474. In the face of war's cruelty. What is the horror of war? What makes war so terrifying to so many? They say death is never closer to a human being than the moment their feet step onto the battlefield. At any given second, you wouldn't even realize when your head had left your shoulders. There are many perspectives one can take when trying to describe the horrors of war. But the truth lies within the reflections seen in the eyes of the soldiers themselves. The ordinary soldiers. Those who lacked great power, who were not special in any significant way. These unfortunate fighters become the perfect lens through which the true tragedies of war can be studied. Among the soldiers of the Empire, after their ship had been destroyed by the enemy, a girl crawled out from beneath the wreckage, trying to survive before the ruins of her doomed vessel swallowed her whole. Her sky-blue hair was disheveled, and her pale skin stained red with blood. She was in unbearable pain, crushed by the debris that had fallen mercilessly upon her, threatening to bury her alive. She was a wave controller. That meant her body lacked any significant physical strength to survive such a collapse unscathed. As she pulled the upper half of her body free, the searing pain was unlike anything she had ever felt before. When she looked down to identify the source of the agony, she found her legs horrifyingly mangled under the rubble of the broken ship, seeing the lower half of her body completely flattened, accompanied by the steady pool of blood leaking from beneath her, made her heart sink deeper into her chest. She was beginning to realize, with growing dread, that she might have become crippled for life. In that moment, she couldn't stop the panic attack from overtaking her. She screamed at the top of her lungs. But her cries were drowned out by the deafening roar of war around her, making her suffering invisible to the world. She screamed for a long time, trying to shove the heavy wreckage off her legs. But as the panic and blood loss took over, her vision of the surrounding massacre became blurred. The world she knew seemed to collapse around her. Not long ago, she had shined among the first-year ranks of the temple. But now, somehow, a girl barely 16 had ended up in the middle of a battlefield. Fate had been cruel, forcing her into a life-and-death situation like this. Minutes passed. each one feeling like an hour. Eventually, she began to regain her composure. "Pain," she whispered softly, her voice weightless in the burning hellscape around her. "I can still feel the pain." Even after all that time, she could still feel her legs. The pain was excruciating, unlike anything she had ever imagined, but it brought with it a faint sliver of hope. "As long as I can still feel them, it means I haven't lost them yet." Her ability to feel pain was proof enough that she wasn't paralyzed. It was the only good news she had. But she had lost too much blood, and her condition was worsening by the second. Taking a deep breath, she focused her remaining strength, conjuring celestial orbs that formed into violent spirals of wind. Channeling the last of her power as a wave controller, she hurled the storms at the debris crushing her. Her winds succeeded, blasting away the wreckage and finally revealing the lower half of her body. But what she saw made her grit her teeth in agony. The bones in her right leg had been completely shattered, bent at an unnatural angle. The left had been impaled clean through by a thick iron rod. Blood gushed continuously, and she was on the brink of losing consciousness. Explosions shook the area around her. She knew she had to move somehow or she'd die here. The ship she was on could sink at any moment. But her legs could no longer support her. She had no choice but to crawl. Crawl across the blood-soaked deck, over the corpses of her fallen comrades. Dragging herself along the floor, she left behind 2 long crimson trails. The only thing keeping her conscious was her primal instinct to survive. The nightmare sea monsters were true catastrophes. Colossal beasts that had already claimed countless lives and sunk many of the Empire's ships. After crawling a surprising distance without passing out, the girl clung to the edge of the ship, pulling herself up just enough to get a better view of the battlefield, hoping to find a way to survive. But the scene before her only deepened her despair. Ships were being dragged down into the depths by massive tentacled creatures, abominations seemingly pulled straight from hell. Flames raged atop others, the result of unrelenting bombardment from the Ultras. The fires were so intense that soldiers hurled themselves into the cursed sea, desperate to extinguish the flames consuming their bodies. But diving into the ocean now was suicide. The nightmare creatures devoured anything that touched those waters. Those who escaped the flames weren't much better off. Many died from fatal injuries, while others, like her, survived only with devastating wounds that left their faces twisted in pain. Severed limbs, spilled intestines, and scattered human organs covered the ground. Endless screams and the terrifying roar of bombardment that refused to stop. The girl who had lived a peaceful life until now couldn't help but ask herself, is this war? Was this what they had come for? Was this truly the first round? The first round of a war destined to last far too long? If that was the answer, then what kind of hell had she thrown herself into? For a moment, she completely lost hope. Then, in the next breath, a third sound rose. One that wasn't death or bombardment. A boy's voice, shouting a single name. Celine. He looked to be around her age, with short black hair, a handsome face, and striking crimson eyes. The boy appeared genuinely frantic, gripping his sword as he leapt from ship to ship, clearly searching for someone. The sight of him reignited a faint spark of hope in the girl's chest. The one whose name he kept shouting. Max! With all the strength she could muster, she called out his name. At that moment, the boy became her last glimmer of hope in the abyss of this hell. And it seemed her voice had reached him, because his eyes widened the moment he saw her. When Max saw Celine alive, his expression finally broke, revealing immense relief, as if a crushing weight had just been lifted from his heart. They had known each other for a long time. Max had always lingered near her, hopelessly in love. Even if she didn't return his feelings, it didn't change the fact that he had always been close enough to be her final beacon of light. Hang in there. I'm coming. Surrounded by a dazzling aura of radiant light, Max charged toward her at full speed. He too was a first-year student at the temple, strong enough to have earned a spot in the elite class. He was undeniably a capable fighter, with a bright future ahead. Celine sighed in relief, thankful that it was Max who had come for her amidst this circle of hell. But that relief, and the soft smile that came with it, turned into utter horror the moment a bolt fell from the sky. No, it wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a magical shell, fired from one of the Ultra's cannons. A random blast. She didn't even know who fired it. But that random shot came crashing down without mercy, right on Max, who didn't even know what hit him. The impact obliterated him completely, hurling his once radiant body deep into the ocean. Mox! Celine screamed, trying to summon her winds to save him, but it was too late. The moment his body touched the demonic waters, nightmare creatures swarmed him, tearing him apart. The last expression on his face was a smile that showed how happy he had been to see her still alive. Chapter 475. The ones he saw one. But 1 second. Just a single second. That was all it took to erase that smile forever. The line between life and death was razor thin. So thin in that cursed place. What now? Celine asked, her face frozen in shock. What was she supposed to do when she barely had the strength to remain conscious, let alone stop her bleeding? As she tried to make sense of the chaos flooding her mind, the war around her only raged harder. More brutal, more violent, stronger. The Ultra's shells fell like rain. Hellish rain. The nightmare creatures continued their assault from below, threatening to drag them all into the abyss. Then, amidst the chaos, a blazing comet streaked through the sky, hurling molten flames so intense they resembled volcanic eruptions from the heavens. That fire instantly incinerated the nightmare creatures, annihilating them without mercy. The comet was just one man, a man who appeared, destroyed the monsters, and vanished as soon as his task was done. But while his attack killed the enemy, the collateral damage caused the ship carrying Celine to catch fire, worsening her predicament. Celine collapsed as the burning vessel beneath her began to sink. Right after that fiery blast, a barrage of lightning struck, followed by brilliant blue flames and chilling ice that froze everything it touched. Someone was manipulating the elements as if they were nothing, destroying everything around them. His strikes were so overwhelming, they showed no mercy, neither to friend nor foe. Trying to endure it, Celine watched it all with her own eyes. Many were in her shoes, people trapped beneath the wreckage, people who drowned in the sea, people who fought for their lives until the bitter end. But some were killed not by the enemy, but by the reckless attacks of the very titans they had relied on to protect them. Sure, those attacks killed the enemy too, but at what cost? In the end, the ones who killed them were their own allies. It was total chaos, and the death toll soared every passing second, reaching astronomical levels. From the Empire's side, the elite squad held their ground fiercely, annihilating most of the nightmare creatures on their own. Especially that woman who tore everything around her apart with her shadow blades. The enemy was strong, but their allies were just as strong. Watching all of this with her own eyes, Celine couldn't help but grasp the painful truth. The law that ruled this world. The strong will always survive, and the weak will have no choice but to die. As if their lives meant nothing. Realizing the worthlessness of her own life, Celine once again began to lose the will to live. Because even if she survived now, what awaited her was nothing but death later. In that state, she couldn't help but wonder. Was strength truly the only thing that mattered in this world? Was strength the sole measure of a person's value? Surrounded by blood, fire, corpses, and death, Celine cried, "This isn't fair. Why did they have to die, forgotten by all, while others lived on to be praised?" She never chose to fight in this war. She was only 16, a mere child who knew nothing of the world. But she had been forced to come, because of her weak lineage and lack of power. When she saw Snow Lionheart deliver his speech, she had felt inspired, thinking she would fight bravely and see her homeland win. She wanted to be part of that epic, A childish dream, rewarded by a brutal awakening. She hadn't even been able to fight, falling victim to the horrors of war from the very beginning. She had done nothing but sit inside a pit of death, witnessing the cruel truth of this world with her own eyes. This isn't fair. Why were they brought to this place, only to have their lives thrown away? If the vanguard, led by monsters like Snow Lionheart, held such overwhelming power, then why bring them? Why didn't they just handle everything on their own? Why did they play with our lives like this? Many of the soldiers who died weren't killed by the enemy's brutality, but by reckless strikes that didn't distinguish between friend and foe. Be it the Ultras or the Empire's elite squad, they were nothing but monsters. Monsters clashing above an anthill. And they were the ants. Ordinary soldiers, cannon fodder, slaughtered in the first clash. Pitiful souls, doomed to die in the most horrific way imaginable. It broke her. How her life had been priced so cheaply, condemned to die in a hell like this, without anyone even knowing she existed. And just when Celine thought she had seen the worst horrors war could offer, more horns of war sounded in her ears. War horns that marked Judgment Day, for her and every wretched soul caught in the Titans' war. After Snow Lionheart's team dealt with most of the nightmare creatures, they suddenly found themselves surrounded by Ultras forces emerging from the shadows. It seemed the Ultras had used the monster attack and ongoing bombardment as cover to sneak their ships into the heart of the Empire's army. From the start, the Ultras outnumbered the Empire 3-1. And now, after the nightmare creatures had decimated many of the Empire's ships, the situation had grown even worse. 15,000 Ultras launched a frontal assault with their warships, while 20,000 more flanked them from the east and west. Perfect pincer move. Trapping the Empire completely. Their pressure was overwhelming, threatening to wipe out Celine and everyone else to the last soul. Collapsed where she lay, Celine could only sit there, bearing witness to the final horror of war. Trying to be a witness to it all. Her small, blurred eyes couldn't see much. But she tried, at the very least, to record the final moments of those who had suffered like her. Even if only for a while, she wanted to remember them. She wanted to remember them, at least until her own life was lost. We're not cannon fodder, as the second round began. While the Titans of the Empire and the Ultras clashed, Celine remained where she was, holding on, using her wind to keep her ship afloat as long as possible. The battle had reached a new level of brutality. Among the Ultras' forces were monsters. Some were hollows, others even lords. The battles between them and the Empire's elite unleashed terrifying destruction. And as a result, the soldiers continued to die, one after another, at a horrifying rate. Celine saw them all. A seasoned warrior lost his life to a sudden ambush. A young duelist died after recklessly charging into the front lines, only to be caught in the crossfire of a battle between two monstrous beings. Wounded soldiers bled out, simply because the holy light cast by Saint Euasha and Uriel never reached them. We are human. As tears and blood streamed down her face, Celine kept watching, until the very end. We are human, just as much as they are. No, even more. But no one saw them. Not once. To the so-called heroes of this war, they were nothing. Insignificant, forgettable, disposable. If their lives had held even a fraction of value, then surely the saint and her candidate wouldn't have left them to die. The only thing that separated them was power. Just power. Nothing else. Chapter 476. The ones he saw. 2. How much strength does one need to survive in a world like this? Was survival only possible by becoming a monster like them? Celine didn't want that. I'm going to die today. There was no doubt in her mind. This was her final day. But even so, she didn't want to become like them. Like those monsters, who dared call themselves the heroes of the Empire. Snow Lionheart, Phoenix Sunlight, Raphael Bloodmater. All of them. They didn't even look at us. When those so-called heroes passed by, they didn't spare them a glance. They simply obliterated everything in their path, then marched forward in search of the next enemy. To Selene, there was no difference between them and the Ultras. Both sides were the same. Monsters, the kind the world would be better off without. In the end, Selene closed her eyes. The Empire was about to fall. The Ultras had completely surrounded them. Annihilation was only a matter of time. They were just waiting to deliver the final blow. Unlike her despair earlier, after witnessing the deaths of hundreds of soldiers just like her, she closed her eyes this time, peace with her fate. She was ready to die, while still holding on to her humanity. This was the end. But sometimes, the end is just the beginning, a beginning of something entirely different. In the darkest moment of the war, when all hope had faded, everyone in Shiskler Bay heard his voice. 10,000 steps of shadow, Fry Starlight style, nameless judgment. When Selene opened her eyes again, she didn't understand what she saw. What was that thing? That overwhelming force? Power strong enough to shake the heavens and turn the world upside down. Before Selene's celestial gaze, the entire Shiskler Bay was split in two. The strike known as nameless judgment was like divine punishment, unleashed upon every sinner and every fool who dared stand against that man. It was an apocalyptic slash that consumed everything in its path, erasing the entire front fleet of the Ultras in mere seconds. 15,000 men. That was the number Fry Starlight killed with that single strike. But nameless judgment didn't stop there. Kept going. Its path of destruction threatening to engulf the Empire's forces as well. Faced with such power, Selene could only stare in awe, silently awaiting the divine judgment to claim her life too. And the violet flames did reach her. They engulfed her, and every other Imperial soldier nearby. Every last one of them. But somehow, miraculously, despite being caught in the very heart of the blast that had destroyed Gavid Linman, Gvardiel V, and 15,000 Ultras, those violet flames didn't harm the Empire's side at all. Not a single wound. Not a hint of pain. Instead, they felt cool, gentle, so strangely comforting that Selene could only sit in disbelief, waiting for a death that never came. And then, he appeared. The man who caused that calamity. The man who split a space the size of a nation in two. She had heard him clearly when he called out his name. That was Fry Starlight, the most terrifying being on the battlefield. And yet, Fry Starlight didn't frighten her at all. His eyes glowed with a violet light. Selene didn't know what exactly he saw in her. But she knew one thing. He was looking at her. He didn't ignore her. He saw her. The same terrifying power that had wiped out thousands in an instant now felt warm and kind. That young man possessed a strength unmatched by any of the monsters who had ignored her and the others all this time. And yet, despite all of that, he did not ignore her. Fry walked quietly past her, then gently placed his hand on her head. His touch calm and kind. From that single touch, Selene felt it. Her aura, broken and weakened by the chaos of war, was suddenly restored to its peak condition, as if healed by some divine force. Her wounds began to mend on their own. In that moment, Selene understood. Fry hadn't just looked at her. He had seen every single soldier of the Empire. After training his senses to the very limits of perfection, Fry had become aware of everything happening around him. He could perceive it all. Every wound, every cry, every flicker of life. That was why he had endured all those past injuries on purpose. Because he had been trying to find the perfect method. A way to save as many as possible. A way to save the soldiers who had struggled so desperately to survive. He had burned alive. For them. Endured countless wounds. For them. Bled. For them. And most importantly, he had seen them. He had acknowledged their existence. He had given value to their lives. He had seen them. Realizing that truth, Selene's eyes filled with tears. Her cheeks flushed red as she stared at the hand that had gently touched her head. That man, who didn't even look much older than her, suddenly felt so distant, so far beyond reach. And yet, she tried to raise her hand toward him, as if to hold him back. She didn't want him to leave. She wanted to reach him, the man who had carried the burden of war on his shoulders alone. The true hero of the human empire. If it was him, Celine felt that she could keep going, that she could survive this nightmare. But he was already too far ahead. Her injured legs wouldn't allow her to catch up. And yet, in that final moment, from the very spot where Frey's hand had touched her head, a strange violet spark burst across Celine's body, making her flinch in surprise. And then, she saw it. A vision unlike anything she had ever seen. A world swallowed by fire and ruin. And in the heart of that devastation, she saw a masked man in black, standing tall. After bringing death to millions, it was Frey. Beside him stood others, figures who had followed him, each of them unique, each of them powerful. But among them, there was a girl with soft, sky-blue hair and a gentle face. She stood close to the masked man, quiet but resolute. She looked stronger, older, different. There was no mistaking it. That girl was Celine, a future version of herself. In a bleak and desolate future where many had died, and yet, a future that felt strangely warm. A vision so gentle, it brought a quiet smile to Celine's heart. Chapter 477. The Man Who Turned the Tide 1. Shiskler Bay, the place that witnessed the first round of the War of Darkness. Those cursed waters that became the grave for countless wretched souls. A battlefield of misfortune where the Empire had lost much. Whether in the past, when Mikar launched his assault on the Ultras and was utterly defeated by Beatrice, or now, as war began anew and the Imperial forces found themselves trapped in a masterfully laid ambush set by the Lord of the Ultras, Gavid Lindman. But unlike the previous time, this battle did not end in a complete defeat for the Empire. Because by the end of it, the entire world witnessed an overwhelming display of raw power. When Frey Starlight split the entire bay in half with a single strike, allies and enemies alike could hardly comprehend what they had just seen. After bringing down Gavid Lindman and his allies, Frey Starlight immediately returned to the Empire's fleet using his teleportation. Standing among the crumbling soldiers of the Empire, he passed through them one by one, channeling his power to transfer aura to each of them. Thanks to his SSS rank aura reserves, Frey possessed more than enough strength to support them all. With every touch, a gentle violet glow flowed calmly, refreshing those who had been moments away from death. That violet glow was strange. Though it carried an ominous, cold, and deadly nature, it brought a completely different effect to the Imperial forces. He wasn't just transferring aura. He was giving them much more. With each pulse of that strange energy, the soldiers of the Empire began to understand him. They began to understand the young man who had declared his name to the world before his devastating attack. Frey Starlight. Unlike those monstrous warlords who fought blindly, treating the soldiers as cannon fodder, as worthless lives. He saw them. He acknowledged their existence. He gave meaning to their lives. He was a mystery. Once known as the filthy Lord Starlight, the disgrace who should have died long ago, the odd champion of the Victoriad, who was blamed for countless deaths the very day after his victory, the man who publicly insulted Emperor Mikar Valerian during his trial, one of the Vanguard Squad's fighters. Frey Starlight. Until now, he was nothing more than a monster in their eyes, a small monster with far too much potential, a criminal who should have perished, but was kept alive by the Empire's rulers, to exploit his power, to act as a shield, and die when the time came. Every single Imperial soldier present had their own negative view of him. But strangely enough, all of it vanished in mere seconds. The hatred, the resentment, the disdain, it all transformed into something entirely different. With teary eyes, some bleeding tears, the soldiers of the Empire stood one by one, their bodies lifted by the sheer force of Frey Starlight's aura. Even if their limbs had been torn off, their guts spilled, even if they were burned alive, even if the pain was so unbearable it made them long for death, they forced themselves to stand. and followed him. Through wreckage and ruin, they could not look away from him, as if bewitched by some unknown magic. Even Selene was among them, trying to stay with them until the very end. Even though she could no longer walk, all she could do was push herself forward using her wind aura, dragging her body along the ground without a care for how she looked. If that's what it took to stay near him, then that much she was more than willing to endure. Out of 10,000 Imperial warriors, after the grueling battle they had fought against both the nightmare beasts and the Ultras, only 4,000 barely remained. Out of the 121 ships that formed their war fleet, 64 were lost. Some were dragged under by nightmare creatures, others destroyed by enemy artillery. The surviving vessels were in no better shape, and the waters they now sailed were no longer the cursed sea, but had turned deep crimson from the horrifying amount of blood spilled by both allies and enemies alike. Among corpses and devastation, the Imperial forces stood, all behind Fry Starlight, following him blindly, entranced by a kind of sorcery none of them could understand. Fry had his back to them, but then he suddenly turned around, his black eyes still glowing with that terrifying violet light. Soldiers of the Empire, the war is still raging. It is far from over. Gripping his swords, Fry pointed Dark Sister to the right, and Balerion to the left, surrounding what remained of the Imperial forces. The enemy was still there. Frey's attack had only wiped out the forces positioned in front of them. He hadn't touched those to the left and right. In other words, even though he had annihilated 15,000 enemies, the Ultras still had 20,000 troops lying in wait, 10,000 to the right, and 10,000 to the left. In short, the enemy still had twice the forces of the Empire. Not to mention, the Empire had already lost 6,000 men. The Ultras had merely stopped attacking for the moment. Likely because they hadn't yet recovered from the shock of what just happened. They had witnessed it with their own eyes. A moment in history so awe-inspiring, it would one day be passed down not in reports or books, but in legends. Only a rare few in this world could annihilate 15,000 enemies with a single strike. And unfortunately for the Ultras, one of them stood with the Empire, a monster of the same caliber as Abraham Starlight himself once was. Standing at the front, the man seemed capable of marching forward for eternity. Soldiers of the Empire, I stand before you now as someone who's endured the same hell each and every one of you has faced. The enemy outnumbers us. They are more savage than us, more ruthless than us. They've slaughtered countless of our brothers and sisters. Standing here, looking into your faces, I see despair, I see sorrow, I see fury, and I see regret. I've seen it all. I have witnessed the struggle of every last one of you. I may not know your names, but I know something far deeper. I am a witness to the story of fierce men and unbreakable women, warriors who chose to die standing on their feet, not kneeling on their knees. Behind us is a homeland, wives and husbands, brothers, sisters waiting, and before us, an enemy who thinks he can steal away everything we lived for. Let this day be remembered. In my name, Fry Starlight, son of Abraham Starlight, let the sky rain down hell upon them. They outnumber us? Then so be it. Here and now, I'll prove to you that a single one of you is worth 1,000 of them. You are not mere soldiers. You are the stars in the night sky of this world. And we are the ones who will write history. Follow me now, not toward victory, but toward immortality. Let the earth quake beneath your march, and let our enemies learn the meaning of fear. With his thunderous speech concluded, Fry Starlight raised his black sword, Dark Sister, to the sky, and once again, the world witnessed a breathtaking scene. In the midst of the night, upon a battlefield drowned in fire, blood, and death, Frey's sword blazed like a beacon of light, guiding the way through the darkness. 10,000 steps of shadow. Everything slowed down. Each word Fry spoke carved itself into their memories. Fry Starlight style, nameless judgment. It was the same technique. the same world-splitting move that had cleaved Shiskler Bay in half. Now, he was showing it again, proving to all that his words were not empty boasts, but a promise fulfilled. With a single swing of Dark Sister, the very fabric of reality shook. And once more the world turned upside down. His attack had not weakened. It had become even stronger, as if the very gates of hell had burst open in the face of the Ultras stationed to the right. Faces frozen in horror, frozen by the death that now loomed above them, a death they could neither sense nor flee from. Once more, Shiskler Bay was split apart, and 10,000 more Ultras warriors were erased from existence. Chapter 478. The Man Who Turned the Tide, 2. What kind of power was this? What kind of greatness? What were they witnessing? The birth of a legend. Right before their very eyes, Fry Starlight had destroyed the entire right flank of the Ultras army, sending them all into a merciless hell. And as the second nameless judgment ended, Fry smiled, ominously, but then he dropped to one knee trying to regain his strength. In front of him, a second massive rift split the sea in two, but Fry himself was no longer in peak condition. Still, he didn't allow the Empire's forces behind him to notice his moment of weakness. We all know that a single warrior of the Empire is worth dozens of them. It had started with 35,000 Ultras versus 10,000 Imperials. Not counting the nightmare beasts, now it was 10,000 versus 4,000. Even after launching Nameless Judgment twice, the Empire was still outnumbered. But the difference in morale? It was vast. The Ultras had fallen into chaos and despair, terrified by a monster whose power could shake the heavens. The Empire, on the other hand, had witnessed the birth of a living legend, a hero they would speak of to their children, and their children's children. Forward, soldiers of the Empire, let's give death something to write about. For eternity! Fry roared one final time, and that roar, it made the hearts of every soldier behind him nearly explode in their chests. Their tear-filled, bloodshot eyes stared at him with awe, with a blazing fire they could no longer contain. The man who fought for them, the hero who destroyed their enemies for them, the one who recognized their worth. He now stood at their head, offering himself as a shield, and all of it ignited at once, unleashing the damned flood of emotion in their chests. They say that on that day, the scream of the Empire's soldiers was heard for thousands of kilometers. It was as if they had all become monsters. They ran, ignoring their injuries. They fought, unshackled from pain. And as they did, they shook the world, with a war cry that would echo through time. Before the eyes of the Imperial vanguard, led by Bloodmater, Snow and the others could only stand in silence, watching the breathtaking display unfold before them. From beginning to end, they didn't understand a thing about what just happened. The Imperial soldiers had charged forward, ignoring them entirely, following Fry and targeting the left flank. What remained of the Ultras' forces? Those weak soldiers who once had no significant role suddenly transformed into terrifying beasts that shook both land and sea alike. At that moment, they looked ready to follow Fry to the deepest pits of hell if need be. Even their own allies felt a chill run down their spines. Let alone the enemies who had just endured 2 consecutive nameless judgment strikes. Merciless and absolute. This is terrifying. Who would have thought a monster like that existed on the Empire's side? Standing at the bow of one of the ships, Emperor Maria gazed at the Imperial forces mercilessly slaughtering the Ultras, so brutally that they made the Ultras seem gentle in comparison. In that moment, Maria remembered something Murgo once said, that perhaps the answer they had long searched for lay on the other side. Now, the Ultras were in total disarray. They had no idea when the next nameless judgment might descend and end their lives. That fear and despair made them easy prey for the Imperial army, now burning with unshakable morale. The Ultras suffered massive losses the moment the two sides clashed. Magical artillery shells never stopped raining down from start to finish. The Imperial soldiers poured out their strength until the very last drop, fighting no matter the condition of their bodies. As long as Fry stood before them, they would keep moving forward, no matter the obstacle, no matter the enemy, no matter the danger. Many died in that madness. But one thing was certain: the number of Ultras who died at their hands far exceeded that. Within the Ultras' command, their leaders could do nothing but watch as the first round of war ended in total catastrophe for their side. How terrifying! That boy! I'm not sure I could even defeat him if I faced him. Positioned on one of the command ships, the hollow Smuff spoke grimly. His appearance was ragged, torn clothing, scattered wounds across his body. Unfortunately for him, Smuff had been positioned on the right flank, which took the nameless judgment head-on. Thanks to his resilience, he survived. But even though the attack wasn't directly aimed at him and was launched from afar, he ended up severely wounded. He's worse than his father. I can't believe one man managed to completely flip the tide of battle so easily. Seated nearby was Baylor Moonlight, the new lord of the Ultras, witnessing the rise of a new star within the Starlight bloodline. In this critical moment of the war, even lords and hollows were hesitant. They feared facing that merciless sword, and the overwhelming power unlike anything they'd seen before. But what the Ultras didn't know was that Fry had already reached his limit for using nameless judgment. It was truly a transcendental attack, Frey's current pinnacle, but it wasn't something he could repeat, not even with his SSS rank Aura reserves. After countless hours of ruthless training, Fry had confirmed he could only unleash that attack once per hand. Once with the left, once with the right. Any further attempt would cause his arms to explode from the sheer strain. But his enemies didn't know that. And that ignorance was what made Fry smile darkly as he continued fighting the Ultras head-on, with the entire Imperial army at his back. He alone had turned the war upside down, saving the Empire from a catastrophic defeat. The Vanguard squad, led by Bloodmater, also joined Fry without hesitation, taking on the strongest of the Ultras. Although the Ultras had superior numbers in the beginning, their forces were utterly annihilated. Their soldiers fell one after another like flies before the fury of Fry and his allies. Witnessing this dramatic shift in the tide, and calculating the staggering losses, the supreme commander of the Ultras, Gavid Lindman, found himself issuing an order he never imagined he'd utter. Retreat! With a roar infused with aura, Gavid Lindman declared the end of the first round of the War of Darkness. With a crushing defeat for the Ultras. As if they'd been waiting for that order, the Ultras began retreating instantly, fleeing from the monsters that had devoured them alive. But the Imperial soldiers gave chase for hours, without pause, without concern for their condition. As long as Fry pursued the enemy, the Empire's warriors ran with him, relentless. The magnitude of Frey's impact was immeasurable, but undoubtedly immense. Kill them, wipe them out, and avenge all those who left this world because of them. Tear them apart, spill their blood, rip them to shreds in the most brutal way imaginable, just like they did to your loved ones. Destroy them, show them what true terror means. Make them feel what it's like to be hunted. No mercy, show them none. Every word Fry shouted became an absolute command to every single Imperial soldier. And that was what drove them to madness, devouring everything in their path. That night, countless lives were lost. Too many souls drowned the Devil's Sea in red. The death toll was insane, and the slaughter went on for hours. In the end, after a long and relentless chase, the Imperial soldiers finally reached their limit, having burned their very souls dry in that battle. Even Fry himself had pushed past his limits. But none of it showed on his face. Once they no longer had to fight, many soldiers collapsed on the spot, unconscious. Some dropped into sleep where they stood, overwhelmed by exhaustion. Others simply died where they stood, their strength gone after forcing themselves to keep going for so long. The final battle and the pursuit lasted 8 full hours. The first round of the war had lasted 12. Half a day in which the world witnessed unfathomable destruction. And even more death. Surrounded by piles of corpses, shipwreck debris, and the remnants of war. Only 21 ships remained from the Empire's once majestic fleet. The number of survivors barely reached 2,000. Out of 10,000 proud Imperial warriors, 8,000 were dead. As for the 2,000 who survived, most had suffered horrifying injuries, with many left in states between life and death. It could be said that the Imperial vanguard would no longer be able to fight in any battles anytime soon. On the other hand, out of the 35,000 soldiers brought by the Ultras, along with 3,000 nightmare sea creatures, every single nightmare creature was slain, and 29,000 men were exterminated. Lord Gvardiel had suffered a fatal blow, cleaved in half, and whether he would survive or not remained completely unknown. Although both sides suffered heavy losses, the difference between them was crystal clear. The Empire had won the first round, and it was all thanks to him. The man who single-handedly turned the tide of war. Fry Starlight. Chapter 479. The Cost of Victory. The first round had ended in a hard-fought victory for the Empire, but the war was far from over. After securing that victory, Fry wandered among the remaining Imperial ships. Lord Starlight, despite carrying the entire battle on his own shoulders, had not wavered, not even once. With steady steps, he walked like a king among what was left of the Imperial forces. This was the worst phase of the war, the aftermath. After they had won, after the fire that had kept their bodies standing burned out, the soldiers of the Empire collapsed one after another, unable to go on. Some broke down from the pain and sheer exhaustion. Others wept bitterly for the souls they'd lost. Loved ones who would never return. They had paid a terrible price. Even though they had won, they could not rejoice in their victory. All that could be heard across the waters of the Shiskler Bay was the sound of sobbing, of silent mourning, and the caws of crows descending from the sky, as they always did, ready to feast on the banquet mankind had prepared for them. Above it all, the giant birds that had once appeared from nowhere were now circling silently overhead, their eyes, galactic orbs, gazing down at the blood-soaked land of men. The Chaos Eaters seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the sight. The eyes of the Imperial soldiers looked lifeless, void of all spark. They resembled hollow souls, mere bodies that had nothing left to move them forward. At the front lines stood the Special Squad, still trying to process what had happened. Snow Lionheart and the Saintesses Urasha and Uriel went from ship to ship, healing soldier after soldier with the sacred power granted to them by the Lord of Light. That blessed power saved many from the brink of death. Yet, even though their wounds were treated, the soldiers showed no reaction to Snow or the others. They didn't even look at them. Their hollow eyes simply stared into the void. Snow Lionheart hadn't said much since the start of the battle. He had fought relentlessly, cutting down both nightmare beasts and ultras alike. It was his first true war, and the impact it left on him was undeniable. He had never seen so much death and blood gathered in one place before. So many had died, and so many more would die in the future. He had known that, and still he couldn't help but curse under his breath. We would have been annihilated out there. Aegon Valerian's plan had put them in this impossible situation. The first round was bound to end in disaster for the Empire. The enemy had outnumbered them 3-1, not to mention the nightmare creatures they had unleashed during the battle. No matter how he looked at it, it had been a one-sided fight. Even if they gave it everything they had, they would have been surrounded and killed, helpless to do anything. That's what would have happened, if not for one person. In that moment, Snow turned his head and looked at the man who had changed the tide of history. Fry Starlight. The man was moving from ship to ship, checking on each and every soldier. The warriors of the Empire had endured far too much, so much that the light had vanished from their eyes. But the moment they saw him, the moment they laid eyes on him approaching, Snow witnessed something strange. The wounded knights, the wave controllers, the seasoned veterans, even the lowly assistants whose names no one remembered, they all rose. Men and women, young and old. They all rose again, gathering around him from every direction. Their lifeless eyes lit up as if by magic, and tears poured from them uncontrollably. An old warrior, an aged veteran of the empire, shuffled toward Fry with hesitation. The man was in terrible condition. One of his arms had been severed, and his body was covered in serious wounds. He reached out to Fry, only to remember his bloodied, filthy hand. Ashamed, he quickly pulled it back. But an unseen force made him freeze. Fry grasped the hand with both of his own. Firmly, without hesitation. He didn't say much. He had seen it all, understood everything they'd been through.
I'm sorry.
If only I were stronger than I am now, perhaps it wouldn't have ended this way. Perhaps they wouldn't have suffered like this. Perhaps they wouldn't have lost their loved ones and comrades to war. Fry apologized. Genuinely, he didn't blame them for being weak. He didn't scorn their helplessness. He didn't seek glory or recognition. He blamed only himself, and that hit them harder than anything else. The soldiers all heard it clearly, and all of them thought the same thing. What is this man saying? He's apologizing? Him of all people. His apology brought them no comfort. No, it did something else entirely. A deep, overwhelming feeling of guilt and helplessness filled the hearts of the soldiers. The man standing before them had fought the war alone. This was not the Empire versus the Ultras. It was the Ultras versus Fry Starlight. He had taken full responsibility for the war upon himself, dragging them out of a deadly siege. A siege that would have killed them all within mere hours. Fry was the one who prevented that. He was the one who bore it all. And he did so flawlessly. Out of the 3,000 nightmare creatures, he had slain 1,250 with his own hands. Out of 35,000 Ultras soldiers, he had wiped out 25,000 of them by himself. He gave everything he had. No, far more than anyone could have imagined. The man before them was a miracle on the same level as Abraham Starlight. The one who should be apologizing wasn't him. It was them. "Raise your head, hero," said the old man with tears in his eyes and a trembling smile. "There is nothing to apologize for. It was an honor to fight by your side, Lord Starlight. I followed your back through this war, and I'll continue to follow you until the day I die. I don't think I could ask for a better end. Even if the world seemed to collapse before them, even if their enemies were 100. No, 1,000 times stronger than them, as long as Fry Starlight was the one leading them. They would follow him to the very end. We'll fight by your side, Lord Starlight. We'll follow you to the end, Lord Starlight. We'll die for you, Lord Starlight." Suddenly, even though exhaustion had long since consumed them, the soldiers began to shout once more, shaking the entire Bay of Sheskler with their cries. Chapter 480, Echoes of the Battlefield. They surrounded Fry from all directions, chanting and roaring until their throats ran dry, and they could shout no more. Through it all, Fry never said a word. He simply walked among them, a faint smile on his face. But this smile was unlike the bitter ones he had always worn. It was different. Confident, resolute. The smile of a warrior standing at the peak. So this is the strength of that man's son. From a distance, watching silently, Bloodmater spoke with an unreadable expression. He had been meant to be the supreme commander of the vanguard. But now, he didn't even bother giving out orders anymore. He knew. The soldiers wouldn't follow anyone else now. They would only follow Fry Starlight, the hero who had shown them miracles today. He really is like his father, when it comes to overwhelming power. The one who answered him was none other than Phoenix Sunlight, the man who had once been Frey's teacher. His burning eyes had just witnessed the return of an age of miracles. To be honest, I've never fully understood Fry Starlight, nor that monstrous power of his. But today he demonstrated a level worthy of Abraham himself. In terms of destructive might, the two are practically equals. Both possessed a similar kind of strength. Strength powerful enough to turn the world upside down. They're alike, yet different at the same time. Abraham was radiant, dazzling, a star among stars. A man one could only call an uncrowned hero. A hero not chosen by the Lord of Light, but by the people themselves. Fry, on the other hand, his power was different. He's more of an executioner than a hero. An executioner who crawled out of the abyss to exact punishment upon all who dared stand in his way. A beast among beasts. A monster whose true limits the world has yet to comprehend. Unlike Abraham, the radiant hero, Fry was the monster forged by this twisted world. That's why he earned that title. The Black Death, a calamity that brings death and destruction wherever he goes. Staring at the wreckage left behind by Frey's ultimate attack, Phoenix stood in silence, his thoughts still caught on the lingering echoes of what he had witnessed. He had seen the nameless judgment before. The second time it was unleashed. Even though it wasn't aimed at him, even though they were on the same side, he couldn't help but feel a creeping terror from the aura it released. It was unlike anything Fry usually emitted. As if it belonged to someone else entirely. The soldiers couldn't understand it. Their level was too low to even sense such a thing. But Phoenix had glimpsed a part of it. It was strange, cold, dark, ominous. No matter how hard Phoenix tried to find the right word to describe it, he couldn't. And who could blame him? He had never witnessed anything like it before. But one thing was clear. It had left its mark on him. It made him ask himself a question he never thought he'd ask. What exactly is Fry Starlight? He was a comrade. A student Phoenix had personally trained. A great warrior fighting by his side. For now. But what kind of future awaited them? Phoenix didn't know the answer. Fry possessed a magic of his own. He had made all the soldiers loyal to him. There was no longer any trace of the hated Fry. He had become the idol of hundreds. Without a doubt, they were now under his mercy. Whatever he decided from this point on would determine the fate of the Vanguard unit. The war wasn't over yet, and their mission was still far from complete. After chasing the Ultras deep into enemy waters, the Imperial fleet had stopped the pursuit some time ago. And yet, they were now closer than ever, closer to the lands of the Ultras, lying just beyond the Devil's Sea. In other words, the second round was about to begin. A round that would surely bring even greater horrors. From the start, 10,000 soldiers were never enough, and they were never given the power they needed. This raised more than a few questions about Crown Prince Aegon Valyrian's so-called plan. It all seemed as if he had sent them to be slaughtered. But they had survived, even one which made it look like Aegon had succeeded. A great victory, with minimal forces. But that wasn't the truth. Their triumph today was the result of one man's effort alone. And yet, life had never been fair. In the end, the credit still went to Aegon. Now, with barely 2,000 survivors, the Imperial forces continued their slow advance toward the continent of the Ultras, awaiting the start of the second round. Time passed quickly, and the first night since the Battle of the Shiskler Gulf came to an end. The Imperial fleet was still sailing slowly, but steadily, toward enemy soil. Aboard the Vanguard's ship, beneath a night sky studded with stars, Fry Starlight staggered down the steps of the vessel, one hand gripping the wall for support, heading toward his private quarters. The Lord of Starlight had kept himself composed until now. He had fought the war, led the soldiers, stood at the front lines, and won. Even after that, he stayed among the troops. He walked through every corner of the fleet, shared his aura with the injured, helped them, gave them everything he could offer. Then came a long meeting with Bloodmater and the others, where they discussed their current state, and whether they should continue forward. That meeting lasted hours, and ended with a decisive conclusion. After such a victory, they couldn't afford to waste their efforts and return to the Empire, giving their enemies time to recover. And so, the decision was made. They would risk everything. All 2,000 men. To try and establish a foothold for the Empire on the land of the Ultras. If they succeeded, the Empire's real army could follow, and the true war would finally begin. Their role, therefore, was crucial, pivotal. Fry had given everything until the very end. He hadn't wavered once. But now, alone and away from all eyes, those shoulders finally collapsed as he opened the door to his room, stumbling inside with the last bit of strength he had left. With clumsy steps, he entered the small cabin. Nothing but a bed and a plain desk inside. He tried to throw himself onto the bed, but his legs gave out before he could, sending him crashing toward the floor. Yet at the last second, just before his head hit the hard surface, Fry found himself landing on something far softer than expected. Then, when he saw the slender white arms catching him, he realized he wasn't alone. With a hollow chuckle, he muttered weakly, "Nice catch."